Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Potter Vibes, presenting to you today, what if Hermione Granger held Harry's hand at age 9 and a forbidden founder's soul bond awakened between them? Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The rain had been falling since morning, the kind that didn't bother with drama, no thunder, no lightning, just a steady, grey insistence that the world would be wet today and there was nothing to do about it. Privet Drive had emptied out. Mrs. Figg was somewhere inside her house with her cats. The Dursleys had driven Vernon to a golf thing he'd been talking about for 3 weeks. Dudley was at a friend's house, doing whatever Dudley did when adults weren't watching, which Harry suspected involved either breaking things or eating them. Harry was free. Not free in the way that mattered, not free of the cupboard under the stairs, or the hand-me-down clothes 2 sizes too large, or the way Aunt Petunia looked at him like he was a stain she couldn't scrub out, but free in the simple, temporary, almost painfully sweet way of having an afternoon with nowhere to be and nobody watching. He'd taken the bus. 3 stops. He had 73 pence in his pocket, which was enough for a bus fare and not much else, but more than enough to get him to the public library on Magnolia Road, which was warm and dry and had never once told him he was unwelcome. He liked libraries for the same reason he liked the space under the stairs when the door was open and the light from the hallway reached the little shelf he'd made from a broken crate. They were places where being small and quiet was fine. Where you didn't take up the wrong kind of space. The library didn't care that his trainers had a hole in the left toe or that his glasses were held together at the bridge with a strip of sellotape. The library just had books, and the books were always doing something interesting. He went straight to the mythology section, the way he always did, because myths were the part of the library where things happened. Gods turned people into trees. Heroes killed monsters with nothing but cleverness and luck. Ordinary people discovered they were secretly descended from something impossible, and instead of being frightened, they rose. Harry liked that part most of all. He was reaching for a book, a big green one with a Celtic knot on the spine, something about British folklore and old magic, when his fingers touched something warm. Not the book. A hand. He pulled back, startled, and found himself looking at a girl. She was roughly his age, maybe a year older, small and brown-eyed with an enormous quantity of hair that seemed to be attempting escape from a plate that had half given up. She was wearing a yellow rain mac with the hood pushed back and a serious expression, the kind that belonged on someone who had been thinking hard about something before this interruption and was not particularly pleased about the pause. She had a stack of 3 books already tucked under her arm. He could see a dinosaur encyclopedia and something about ancient Rome, and she'd been reaching for the Celtic knot book with the focused certainty of someone who had already decided it was hers. They both looked at the book. They both looked at each other. "I was reaching for that," she said. Not unkindly. Just as a statement of fact. "So was I," Harry said. She considered this for a moment, the way someone considers a maths problem, not with irritation exactly, but with genuine analytical attention. Then she said, "We could share it. I mean, if you're staying. I have a table. It's by the window." Harry blinked. Nobody had ever just offered him a table before. "All right," he said. She handed him the book, which he understood instinctively to be a gesture of trust. He had it, so he was less likely to leave with it while her back was turned, and turned to lead him to the window table. He followed, still holding the book, and that was when it happened. She turned back to check he was coming, and her hand swung back, and his hand was in exactly the wrong place, and their fingers brushed, not the glancing, accidental near-miss from before, but a real, full contact, her small brown fingers pressing against his knuckles for the span of 2 seconds, maybe 3. The world stopped. Not stopped the way it does in metaphors, stopped the way a clock stops, when something inside it breaks or locks or finds itself suddenly and completely unable to continue as it was. The sound of the rain on the library windows went very far away. The hum of the fluorescent lights went silent. The girl's eyes went wide, and Harry felt his own face doing something he didn't have words for, because what was happening in his chest was not something 9 years of life on Privet Drive had prepared him to describe. It felt like a key turning. Not in a door, in him. Somewhere deep and central, in the place where ribs meet the breastbone, something that had been closed and locked and buried under years of being small and quiet and invisible turned over once, completely, with a resonance he felt in his teeth. And from that place, something poured outward, warm, vast, ancient in a way that made him think of forests older than roads, of standing stones, of the sound of bells carried on wind from somewhere you can't see. The girl gasped. The books under her arm fell to the floor with a series of crashes that made the librarian at the front desk look up sharply. Neither of them noticed. They were staring at each other with the particular expression of people who have just understood something enormous and have absolutely no language for it. Harry's hand was still touching hers. Neither of them pulled away. The warm thing in his chest pulsed once, like a second heartbeat, and then settled into a steady rhythm that was just slightly out of sync with his own, close enough to harmonize, different enough to know it was hers. Then the moment released them, the way a wave releases the shore, and the library noise came flooding back, and the girl snatched her hand away and looked at it like it had done something without asking. "What was that?" she whispered. "I don't know," Harry said. Which was true. But he knew it was real, which felt more important. She stared at him for another second, then bent and picked up her books with brisk efficiency, tucking them back under her arm. When she straightened, her expression had shifted, less startled, more intent, the look of someone who has decided that a strange thing is also an interesting thing. "I'm Hermione," she said. "Hermione Granger." "Harry Potter." She nodded, processing this the way she seemed to process everything, with attention and speed. Then she turned and walked to the table by the window, and he followed, and they both sat down, and she opened her Rome book and he opened a Celtic knot book, and the rain kept falling, and the new thing in Harry's chest kept beating alongside his own heart, and neither of them talked about it for 20 minutes, which was somehow the right thing to do. Then Hermione put down her book and said, without looking up, "Have you ever made something happen? Something you didn't mean to?" Harry's hands went still on the page. "What kind of something?" "Accidental things. Strange things. My hair grows back overnight when it's been cut. Once when a boy at school was pulling it I turned around and he was on the other side of the playground. He couldn't explain how he got there." She paused. "I've never told anyone that." Harry looked down at the page in front of him, which happened to be open to an illustration of a druid circle, stones arranged in a pattern that I kept wanting to follow. "I ended up on the school roof once," he said. "When Dudley was chasing me. I was on the ground and then I was just up there. And last week Aunt Petunia cut my hair short and when I woke up it was the same as before." He hesitated. "Dudley cried. She blamed me." Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I looked it up. In a book about folklore. It might be magic." Harry looked at her. She was watching him with brown eyes that were completely serious, no trace of the "are you laughing at me" defensiveness he'd learned to expect from that word. She meant it. "My parents think it's a phase," she added. "Or my imagination. They're dentists. They're quite practical. My aunt and uncle think they call it freakishness," Harry said. The word sat flat and ugly between them on the table. Hermione's expression did something complicated. "That's a horrible word for it," she said. "Yeah." She reached out and touched the corner of the Celtic knot book, not quite touching his hand this time, careful of the space. "I think we're the same," she said. "Whatever it is. I think we're the same kind of thing." The pulse in Harry's chest, that second heartbeat that wasn't his, throbbed once in quiet agreement. He thought, yes. They met at the library every Saturday after that, through October and November and into December, when the rain turned to frost and the library put up a Christmas tree by the door that lost its needles almost immediately. They got better at avoiding accidental contact, not because it was painful, but because when it happened, it was too much, a wave of something that shorted out their thoughts and left them both blinking for 30 seconds afterward. They found a careful middle distance that let them exist near each other without constantly triggering whatever the thing between them was. But they talked. They talked the way people talk when they've both been quiet for too long, with urgency, interrupting each other, veering between subjects so fast they lost track, circling back to find the thread. Hermione had read more books than anyone Harry had ever met, and she read them like she was in a conversation with them, arguing with the parts she disagreed with and storing the useful bits in a mental filing system she could access with alarming speed. Harry hadn't read much, because the Dursleys didn't encourage it, but his mind worked differently. He saw patterns, felt the shape of things, understood intuitively how pieces fit together in ways that sometimes surprised even him. Hermione would explain something she'd read and Harry would say, "But that doesn't account for the other thing, the one you mentioned about the stones," and Hermione would go still and say, "How did you know those were connected?" and Harry would shrug and say he just felt like they were, and she'd go back and find that yes, they were, and then she'd look at him with an expression that was half frustration and half delight. He brought her a book about Celtic mythology for Christmas, which he'd found in the second-hand bin at the back of the shop for 15 pence. She gave him a book about ancient magical traditions, real magic, openly labeled as such, which she'd ordered from a specialist bookshop her parents hadn't looked at closely. They sat in the library and read each other passages. "It says here that soul bonds were real," Hermione said in December, 3 months after the library. She'd been reading the Magic Traditions book and her voice had gone very careful, the way it did when she'd found something significant and was deciding how to present it. Not like fairy tale love spells. Old magical bonds. They used to form between mages whose magical cores were complementary. It says they were recorded as far back as the medieval period. Harry looked up from the Celtic book. What did they do? The bonds? They linked the mage's magic. Amplified it. The text is being a bit vague but it keeps using the phrase foundational resonance, which I think means, she paused, working it out, the magic of one person could sort of stabilize and enhance the magic of the other. Like two instruments playing in a key together are louder than either one alone. The second heartbeat pulsed. Harry said, quietly, "Do you think that's what happened to us?" Hermione looked at the book for a long moment. Then she looked at him. "I think something happened to us," she said. "I don't think it was an accident." Harry thought about the feeling when their hands had touched, the key turning, the ancient resonance, the sense of something enormous and deliberate clicking into place. He thought about the dreams he'd been having, stone corridors, torchlight, voices speaking in a language that wasn't English but that he somehow understood, two figures arguing passionately about something they both cared about fiercely, the argument of people who built something together and disagreed about what it was for. "I've been dreaming," he said. "Have you?" Hermione looked at him with wide eyes. "In Old English," she said. "Or, not English exactly. Something older." "A woman with dark hair," Harry said. "And a man who laughs a lot. They're arguing about a castle." Hermione set the book down on the table very slowly. "I see the same two people," she said. "I thought I was making it up." They sat with that for a moment. Outside, the frost had thickened on the library window, and the street beyond it was pale and quiet. "We're not making it up," Harry said. "No," Hermione agreed. "We're not." January was when the magic stopped being accidental. Harry was in the kitchen making Dudley's breakfast, his standard morning duty, scrambled eggs and toast with the crusts cut off, because Dudley had decided crusts were offensive, when he felt the pan beginning to burn. Not saw it. Felt it, a flicker of heat awareness he'd been developing for weeks, a sensitivity to the physical world around him that had been sharpening like a knife against a whetstone since October. He reached for the knob to turn down the heat and thought cooler, not quite a word, more of an intention, and the burner adjusted without his hand touching it. He stood very still for a moment. Then he thought warmer, and it went warmer. Then off, and it turned off. He served Dudley's eggs and said nothing, and the entire time his heart was hammering with something that was not fear but was close to it, the feeling of a door opening onto a room that is much larger than the house it's inside. That afternoon he went to the library and told Hermione. She'd been waiting for him, which was not unusual. She was almost always there before him, already established at the window table with her books arranged in her particular system, but today she had a different kind of energy, a barely contained brightness. "I did something deliberate," she said, before he'd even sat down. "This morning. I was late for school and I couldn't find my backpack and I thought about where it was, and it was like a cord pulling me toward it. I could feel exactly where it was." She stopped. "You look like you're about to say the same thing." "Different thing," Harry said. "But yeah." They stared at each other. Then Hermione pulled a notebook out of her bag. She had a notebook now specifically for this, and uncapped her pen. "Right," she said. "Tell me everything." This was what Hermione did with extraordinary things, she documented them. She had 3 pages of notes already, dates, descriptions of the dreams, a list of the accidental incidents they'd each experienced since October, organized chronologically and cross-referenced by type of magic. Harry found it enormously comforting, actually. Hermione's notebooks were a way of saying, "This is real, we are taking it seriously, we are not going to pretend it isn't happening." He told her about the hob, and she wrote it down, and then she told him that she'd stopped a dog from barking at her that morning. She'd looked at it and thought hush, and it had sat down and gone quiet, and she'd walked past it with her heart going very fast. "We're getting better," Harry said. "We're getting stronger," Hermione corrected. Which might not be the same as better. She looked at her notes. "Harry, I've been thinking about the bond. About why it exists. The book said soul bonds were rare, not just unusual, rare. Like, documented maybe a dozen times in recorded magical history rare. But it also said they weren't random. It said there had to be a reason. The founders," Harry said. He'd been thinking about this too, in the wordless way he thought about things, feeling the shape of the idea from the outside. Hermione looked at him. "You think so too? The dreams. The castle they're arguing about. I think they made it, whatever this is. Or made it possible. I think they put it there on purpose." He leaned forward. "Don't you? It feels designed. Like someone built a very old lock and we're the right key." Hermione was quiet for a moment, biting the end of her pen. Then, "That's either brilliant or terrifying. Can't it be both?" She almost smiled. "Yes," she said. "I suppose it can." February brought a letter. Not the Hogwarts letters, those were still 6 months away, but a letter that arrived for Harry by regular post, forwarded from the school, printed on paper so thick it felt like fabric, with no return address and a seal Harry had never seen. He almost didn't open it. But the second heartbeat went still in his chest in a way that said attention, so he took it to his cupboard and closed the door and opened it in the small cone of light from his nightlight. It wasn't a long letter. Just 3 lines, in handwriting that slanted sharply left. "The magic you carry is not accidental. It is not a burden or an affliction. It is a birthright, and it is waking. Be patient. Help is coming." No signature. The paper smelled like wood smoke and something else, something green and electric. Harry stared at it for a long time. Then he thought, very clearly, she should know about this. And Hermione, across the city, sat up in her bed with the sudden sharp sense that Harry needed her attention, the bond between them glowing like a coal in the dark. She thought back, "I know. Tomorrow." He felt it. He lay back down, the letter on his chest, and stared at the underside of the stairs above him. Help is coming. He thought, it already started. They didn't talk about what it meant to be bonded, not in March, not in April, not in the long stretch of spring that softened the library windows from frost to green. They existed in a careful, honest proximity that neither of them wanted to examine too closely, because they were 9 and then 10 and they didn't have the words, and also because the magic itself was too interesting and too urgent and too large to leave much room for conversation about feelings. But something was happening anyway, in the background, in the quiet. Harry found that he could tell when Hermione was frustrated or frightened, not from the bond's warmth, which was its steady state, but from a kind of temperature change, a drop in the ambient quality of the connection that told him something was wrong before she'd spoken a word. He found himself walking to the library on days when he hadn't planned to, following the pull of her distress like a compass, and arriving to find her struggling with something, a maths problem, an argument with a classmate, a book that wasn't giving her the answer she needed, and sitting down beside her and just being there, which seemed to help. She did the same for him, in her own way. When the Dursleys were particularly bad, when Vernon's voice rose to the specific register that meant Harry was going to be sent to his cupboard without dinner, Hermione's presence in the bond intensified, a deliberate warmth, like someone pressing their palm flat against the wall between two rooms. She couldn't be there in person. But she was there in the way that counted, the way that meant, "You are not alone in this, I know it is happening, you are real and I see you." He never told her specifically what the bad days looked like. She never asked, because she already knew. And she never made it into something pitying, which he would have hated. She just made sure he knew the connection was open, steady, and entirely reliable. He thought that might be the most important thing anyone had ever done for him. The dreams got more specific in May. He saw the woman clearly now, dark-haired, sharp-featured, with eyes that missed nothing, wearing robes that were both practical and somehow grand, the look of a person who had decided that beauty and function were not mutually exclusive. She sat at a great stone desk covered in papers and scrolls and something that glowed faintly blue, and she argued with the laughing man who stood at the window, broad-shouldered, red-haired, with a sword at his hip that he seemed to have forgotten about entirely. "You're asking them to carry something enormous," the woman said. "I'm asking them to carry something true," the man said. "There's a difference. You're asking children who haven't been born yet to shoulder a burden because we weren't strong enough, not a burden." His voice had changed, gone quieter, and somehow that made it more serious. "An inheritance. A gift. The magic won't force anything on them, Rowena. It never forces. You know that." The woman, Rowena, was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "If they choose to carry it, they'll be extraordinary." The man smiled. "They already are. We made sure of that." Harry woke with his heart hammering and the bond blazing like a sunrise in his chest. He thought, with absolute certainty, that he had just watched Rowena Ravenclaw and Godric Gryffindor argue about whether to trust him and Hermione with the most powerful magical connection they could create. He thought, they said yes. And he lay in his cupboard under the stairs on Privet Drive and felt, for what might have been the first time in his conscious memory, genuinely, completely grateful. The Hogwarts letters arrived on a Tuesday in July, which Harry spent mostly in the garden pulling weeds because Vernon had decided that was a suitable activity for the school holiday, and which Hermione spent in her bedroom rearranging her bookshelf for the third time that month because she'd been restless all morning without knowing why. Harry's letter arrived the way letters arrive when something enchanted is behind them, inexplicably, through a window he was sure he'd seen closed, carried by an owl that landed on a garden fork with the particular gravity of an emissary delivering important news. The owl held out its leg. Harry took the letter. The owl blinked at him with large amber eyes that somehow communicated that it had done this thousands of times and was not impressed by his astonishment, then departed with no theatrical fuss. He stood in the garden in the summer morning with the envelope in his hand, Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. The cupboard under the stairs. He looked at that for a moment. The address was oddly specific, and oddly accurate, and it made something twist in him, not shame, exactly, but something. He filed it away and turned the envelope over and looked at the seal, a crest with a lion and an eagle and a serpent and a badger, and the words Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in ink that shifted from green to red in the sunlight. His second heartbeat surged. Hermione's presence in the bond lit up like a lamp. She already had her letter. Of course she did. She'd probably read it twice and was already cross-referencing the supply list with available bookshops. He went inside and sat on the floor of his cupboard in the dark and read his letter 3 times, and the entire time the bond between them was a warm and constant brightness, carrying a wordless message that he understood perfectly: we were right. We were always right. This is where we were always going. Vernon's voice boomed from the kitchen, asking what he was doing in there and why the weeds weren't finished. Harry folded the letter into his pocket, pressed his hand flat against his sternum for a moment, feeling the double beat beneath it, and stood up. He was not afraid. He had never been afraid of the Dursleys, really. He'd been careful, which was different, but now the carefulness dropped away and what was left was something simpler and more solid. He was going to school. A real school. The kind with actual magic. And there was a girl across London reading the same letter who had been his person since they were 9 years old and had reached for the same book in the rain, and whatever came next was going to come for both of them. He opened the cupboard door and walked into the hallway and looked at Vernon, who was red-faced and enormous in the kitchen doorway. "I need to talk to you," Harry said, "about a school." Vernon stared at him. There was something in Harry's voice that was different, not louder, not angrier, just settled in a way it hadn't been before, and Vernon, who was not an intelligent man but had an animal brain sensitivity to shifts in power, felt it and didn't like it. "And after that," Harry said, "I'll finish the weeds." He put the letter on the kitchen table, and the Hogwarts seal caught the morning light and flashed briefly red and gold, and Vernon's face went through several colors, and Harry stood in his kitchen on Privet Drive and felt the bond hum quietly in his chest like a promise being kept. Outside, the owl was perched on the garden gate, watching. It seemed, in some vague way, satisfied. He called Hermione from the phone box on the corner that afternoon. She answered on the first ring. "I got mine," she said, without preamble. "I know. I felt it. I've already written back. I said we'd both be attending." A pause. "I hope that's all right." I just felt like we should confirm together." That's exactly right," Harry said. Another pause, but a good one, the kind full of things they both understood without saying. The kind that the bond made possible, the shorthand of two people who had been paying very close attention to each other for the better part of 2 years. "Harry," Hermione said. "I've been thinking about the dreams. About what Rowena said, they'll be extraordinary." "Yeah. She wasn't wrong, was she?" It wasn't a question, not quite. More like someone reading a conclusion they'd been approaching for months and finally reaching it on the page. "No," Harry said. "I don't think she was." "Good," Hermione said, with the specific briskness she used when she'd reached a decision and intended to act on it. "Then we should probably act like it." He laughed, a real laugh, the kind that surprised him by existing, and outside the phone box the summer sky was enormous and blue and full of a future that was rushing toward him like a wave he'd decided to stop dodging. He said, "Meet me at the library on Saturday." "I'll be there before you," she said. "I always am." "True," he said. And hung up. And stepped out of the phone box into the warm July afternoon and looked up at the sky, and felt the bond settle around his heart like something that had always belonged there, because it was built before either of them was born by two people in a stone castle arguing about whether to trust children they'd never meet with something they'd given everything to protect. They'd been right to trust them. They were going to Hogwarts. And they were not going alone. Chapter 2, Letters and Lightning. Diagon Alley was loud in a way Harry hadn't expected. He'd expected magic, he'd been dreaming about it for 2 years, reading about it, feeling it hum in his fingertips every time he reached for something and it moved without being touched. But he hadn't expected the noise of it, the full-bodied, overlapping chaos of a street where every shop was doing something extraordinary and nobody thought it was remarkable. A cart of cauldrons was being levitated by a bored-looking man in midnight blue robes. An owl hooted from a cage somewhere above him. Something that smelled incredible and slightly dangerous was coming from a shop to his left. A group of children ran past with their robes half untucked, trailing sparks. Harry stood in the middle of it all and felt the bond flare with recognition. This is it, this is the thing, this is what we always were, and then Hermione was at his elbow, because she'd been walking half a step behind him since they'd come through the leaky cauldron, and she said, very quietly, "Oh. Just that. Oh." With a breath in it that meant everything. He looked at her. Her eyes were moving over the street with the focused intensity she usually reserved for very good books, taking it apart, processing it, filing it away, but there was something else in her face too, something that had nothing to do with analysis. She looked like someone who had spent years suspecting that the world was larger than it appeared and had just been proven definitively right. "Yeah," Harry said. She pressed her lips together, suppressing something, a smile, maybe, or a sound she didn't want to make in public. Then she straightened her shoulders and looked at her list. "Gringotts first," she said. "We need to exchange money before anything else is worth thinking about." Behind them, trying to keep pace in the crowd, Mr. and Mrs. Granger were doing the valiant and largely unsuccessful work of appearing calm about everything. They were good people, Harry had decided in the 2 months since he'd met them properly. Hermione had arranged it with the tactful efficiency she applied to anything important, telling her parents she had a friend she wanted them to meet and delivering Harry to their door on a Saturday afternoon with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone presenting credentials. Richard Granger had shaken Harry's hand with the careful warmth of a man who has heard a great deal about someone and is reserving judgment until he's formed his own. Emma Granger had looked at the two of them standing side by side in the doorway and had said nothing for a moment and then said, "Right. I think," with the tone of someone who has just understood something that deserved a proper response. They had been better to him in 2 months than the Dursleys had been in 10 years. He hadn't told them that. But he thought Hermione might know. The Dursleys had not come. Vernon had spent 3 days loudly insisting that none of this was real, that Harry had clearly been corresponding with some kind of cult, that he absolutely refused to take part in any of it. Then the letter had arrived from the school with a supplementary note, handwritten, Harry had noticed, in a very specific and very deliberate hand, explaining that a student escort would be available for children needing assistance accessing Diagon Alley, and Vernon had gone a color that had no name, and Petunia had sat very still at the kitchen table with a look Harry had never seen on her face before. Not anger. Not contempt. Something that might, in another person, have been grief. He hadn't tried to understand it. He'd packed his second-hand backpack with the things that mattered, the Celtic book, Hermione's letters, a photograph of the library on Magnolia Road that he'd taken with a disposable camera, and he'd left, and the Grangers had been waiting on Privet Drive in their sensible car, and Harry had gotten in the back next to Hermione without looking back. The escort, it had turned out, was a young witch named Daedalus Diggle who wore a violet top hat and vibrated with a particular kind of delighted energy that Harry found both exhausting and oddly reassuring. He'd brought them through the leaky cauldron, tapping the bricks with his wand while Harry and Hermione watched with identical expressions of absolute attention, and then the wall had opened and the alley had been there, enormous and impossible and real. Now Diggle was somewhere behind the Grangers, occasionally knocking into other shoppers and apologizing in a voice several decibels too loud for the circumstances. They went to Gringotts. The bank was cold and vast in the way that money always seemed to want to be, all high ceilings and marble and the sense that being human was a slightly embarrassing condition the architecture had no interest in accommodating. Goblins moved behind their high counters with the efficiency of people who are very good at their jobs and have very limited patience for people who are not. Harry watched them with interest. Hermione had already read about Gringotts, she'd found 3 different references to goblin-run banks in the magical books they'd acquired, and she was watching the goblins with the expression she used when she was confirming a hypothesis. At Harry's vault, the goblin drove the cart with professional indifference while Harry held the small key. Hagrid, no, Diggle, no, there had been mention of a giant man, in some letter, he couldn't quite, the key that had come with Dumbledore's original note. Harry had carried it for weeks without knowing quite what to do with it. It opened a vault that was, when the door swung back, considerably more than he'd expected. He stood in the orange torchlight looking at towers of gold coins and felt nothing so simple as pleasure. What he felt was more complicated, something about years of not having enough to eat and wearing Dudley's cast-offs and being told constantly that he was a burden, held up against this room full of wealth that had apparently always been his. He felt Hermione's hand settle on his shoulder, a brief and deliberate pressure. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. He filled the bag the goblin had given him and they went back up. Madame Malkin's was where they met Draco Malfoy, which Harry had not planned and Hermione had not planned and which seemed, in retrospect, like the first collision between who they were and who they were going to have to deal with. He was already being fitted when they came in, pale, blonde, with the particular posture of someone who has been told their whole life that posture matters and has internalized it as fact. He had a pointed, fine-boned face and pale grey eyes that assessed Harry and Hermione the moment they came through the door with the quick, calibrating intelligence of someone who sorts people into categories immediately and rarely revisits his decisions. "Hogwarts," he said. "Yes," Harry said. Draco's eyes moved over them. Something in his expression said he was processing. 2 children, clearly first years, the girl with the hair and the stack of books already acquired, the boy with the dark hair and the glasses and his gaze stilled on Harry's forehead for a fraction of a second, something flickering in it, and then moved on. "Draco Malfoy," he said, with the tone of someone expecting the name to mean something. "Harry Potter," Harry said, with no particular tone at all. Draco's composure fractured for just a moment, a tiny widening of the eyes, quickly controlled, and then reassembled itself into something more careful. "I know who you are," he said. "Most people seem to," Harry said. Hermione, who had been watching this exchange with the focused patience of a scientist observing something she's not sure yet is interesting, said, "Hermione Granger." Draco looked at her. "Muggle-born?" It was said without cruelty, but not without weight. It was the voice of someone testing a hypothesis rather than expressing a welcome. "Yes," Hermione said, meeting his eyes. She said it the way she said everything she believed, without apology. Draco was quiet for a moment. Harry had the sense of gears turning. This was not a stupid boy, not by any stretch, and he was recalibrating. Whatever script he'd been running on had hit something that didn't fit its parameters. "My father says Muggle-borns are," he started. "I know what your father says," Hermione said, which was not quite true but was close enough to be effective. "Most opinions about things people don't understand are predictable." Draco's eyes sharpened. "You don't know my father." "I don't need to," she said, pleasantly. "People who need bloodlines to evaluate other people have already told me everything useful about themselves." The silence that followed was the particular kind that comes when someone has been hit by something they can't immediately respond to because it's too accurate to be dismissed and too calm to be attacked. Madame Malkin made some adjustments to Draco's robes. Draco looked at Hermione with grey eyes that had gone slightly unreadable. "You're both going to Gryffindor, I suppose," he said. "Perhaps," Harry said. "Does it matter?" Draco said nothing. But something in his expression had changed, just slightly, not softened, not exactly, but shifted. The way a face shifts when an argument isn't going the way it was supposed to and the person has to recalculate. He left shortly after without saying anything else. Harry watched him go. "He's going to be a problem," Hermione said, thoughtfully. "Maybe," Harry said. "Or maybe he's just never met anyone who talked back." Hermione considered this. "Also possible," she allowed. Ollivander's was small and dusty and completely still, the way of places that have absorbed decades of important moments into their walls. The boxes rose to the ceiling in floor-to-ceiling shelves, 12,000 wands in their cases, and the air smelled of wood and something electric. Mr. Ollivander appeared from between 2 shelves the way shadows appear, not walking in but simply being there, silver-haired and moon-eyed, with a manner that suggested he had been thinking about something else and was merely visiting this conversation. He looked at Harry. "Curious," he said. He had the specific tone of someone who says things because they are true, without particular concern for how they land. "I wondered when I'd see you, Mr. Potter. I remember every wand I've ever sold. Your mother, lily wood and willow, 10 1/4, excellent for charm work. Supple. And your father, mahogany," Harry said. He knew this, not from a book, but from the dream memories that sometimes surfaced, Rowena Ravenclaw's voice listing the properties of various magical woods like she was memorizing something important. 11 inches. Pliable. Ollivander went very still. His moon eyes moved from Harry's face to the space around him, the way eyes move when looking for something invisible. Yes, he said, after a moment. Quite right. He pulled his tape measure from somewhere, which began measuring Harry on its own without being asked, and said, "Let's try." He handed Harry a wand. Nothing. Another. Harry felt a faint flicker of warmth, but Ollivander was already taking it back, not satisfied. 3 more. 8 more. The wands that were wrong felt wrong in a particular way, like putting on a shoe that's the right size but belonging to someone else. Then Ollivander handed him a wand of holly, 11 inches, phoenix feather core, and Harry's hand closed around it, and the warmth that flooded up his arm was different from anything else in the shop, old and sure and resonant, a chime struck at exactly the right pitch. Red and gold sparks scattered from the tip. Curious, Ollivander said, again, but differently this time. Very curious. For you see, the phoenix whose tail feather is in your wand gave another feather. Just one other. The wand that killed your parents and gave you that scar is a brother to yours. Harry looked at the wand in his hand. He felt the second heartbeat in his chest pulse once, and had the sudden, peculiar thought that the wand felt like part of the bond, not the same as the bond, but harmonically related to it, as if it had been waiting for something specific to complete. How interesting, he said. Ollivander studied him. Most children, Harry suspected, found this information frightening or dramatic. He'd said it calmly, with genuine intellectual curiosity, and the old wandmaker seemed to find this both unexpected and interesting. Then Hermione stepped forward. She handed her list to Ollivander and he looked at her, really looked, the same assessing, silver-eyed consideration he'd given Harry, and something changed in his expression. Not surprise, exactly. More like a hypothesis confirmed after a long wait. "Miss Granger," he said, without her having introduced herself. Hermione blinked. "Have we met?" "No," Ollivander said. "But I have been in this business for a very long time. And I have learned to recognize resonances." He turned and walked along his shelves with a purpose he hadn't shown before. When he returned, he had a wand that was clearly not chosen at random. "Vine wood," he said, 10 3/4 inches. "Dragon heartstring core." He held it out. Hermione took it, and every candle in Ollivander's shop brightened simultaneously. Not the warm sparkle Harry's wand had produced. Every candle, brighter, for 3 full seconds, the whole shop flooding with golden light that came from everywhere at once. Ollivander breathed out through his nose. "Oh my," he said softly. Then, and this was the part that made even Harry straighten, Hermione held the wand up and the warmth from Harry's holly wand responded. The two wands, in their two hands, separated by 6 feet of dusty shop, began to sing. Not loudly, not in any way that could be described as sound, really, but in the way that tuning forks sing when struck at the same frequency, a vibration in the air that was almost music, a harmonic resonance that made the fine hairs on Harry's arms stand up. Ollivander looked from one wand to the other. Then he looked at the two children holding them. His moon eyes held something that was not quite fear and not quite awe but lived in the neighborhood of both. "When did it happen?" he asked. "When did what happen?" Hermione said, though Harry suspected she knew. "The bonding," Ollivander said. He said it simply, without theater. "The magical cores, they've already begun to align. This hasn't been, I've read about this, in very old texts." He paused. "I've never seen it." 2 years ago, Harry said. "A library. We touched hands." Ollivander looked at him for a very long time. "Foundational resonance," he said, more to himself than to them. "That's the phrase," Hermione said. Ollivander turned and walked back to his shelves and stood with his back to them for a moment, very still. When he turned around again his expression had settled into something quiet and determined. Be careful, he said, which was not what Harry expected. Not for your own sake, I don't think either of you needs that advice. But what you carry, there are people who will want to use it. And people who will want to end it. Both will underestimate you, which is your greatest advantage. He looked at Harry. Don't waste it. We won't, Harry said. He paid for both wands. Hermione had moved to pay for hers and he'd done it before she could, which made her frown slightly, which he ignored, and they walked out of Ollivander's into the bright afternoon of Diagon Alley, and both wands, tucked into their bags, hummed quietly against each other like old friends. The bookshop was Hermione's favorite part and she didn't pretend otherwise. Flourish and blots smelled the way all good bookshops smell, old paper and binding glue and the particular dry warmth of many thousands of stories compressed into a small space, and Hermione walked through it with the expression of someone coming home. She had her list in one hand and was already cross-referencing it against a second, privately written list she prepared over the summer, which was longer than the official one by approximately a factor of 3. Harry helped her carry books. This was, he discovered over 2 years, the specific shape his usefulness took in Hermione's vicinity when she was in research mode, steady presence, book transport, the occasional observation that cut through to the thing she was actually looking for. He was good at the last part. He didn't always know what he knew, but he knew when something was relevant, the way a compass needle doesn't understand north but finds it anyway. They were in the history section when Ron Weasley collided with them. Not metaphorically, literally collided, coming around a shelf corner with an armful of textbooks and no particular awareness of his surroundings, and cannonied directly into Harry, who absorbed the impact without stumbling because the bond had given him about a half-second's warning in the form of approaching presence, and caught 2 of Ron's books before they hit the floor. Sorry. Ron said, already talking before he'd fully registered them. Sorry, my mum says I'm always, oh. He'd clocked Harry's forehead. His ears went red. You're Harry Potter. Yes, Harry said, handing back the books. Ron's ears were now spectacularly red. He was tall for his age, freckled, with the particular look of someone who had grown up in a house with many siblings and had learned to navigate the world at volume. He had warm brown eyes and a genuine smile that surfaced through his embarrassment like something he couldn't fully suppress, and he said, I'm Ron Weasley. We're all going to Hogwarts, my family, I've got 6, well 5, they've all been. I've heard a lot about you. A pause. Everybody has. Apparently, Harry said. This is Hermione. Ron looked at Hermione, who was watching him with the alert, assessing expression she used for anything new. Hi, Ron said. Hello, Hermione said. A slight pause. Ron looked between them, and Harry could see the moment he registered that they were, not twins, not identical, but together in some way that was immediately apparent, moving in the same orbit, finishing each other's silences. Ron was perceptive under the cheerful surface, Harry could tell that much already, and whatever he was picking up gave him a moment's pause. You already know each other, he said. 2 years, Harry said. Oh, Ron said. Something adjusted in his expression, not quite disappointment, but a kind of recalibration. He'd probably had ideas about becoming Harry Potter's first friend, and those ideas were clearly a couple of years too late. But Ron's face, Harry noted, was the kind that didn't hide things well and also didn't harbor things long. He looked at it for 2 seconds and let it go. Muggleborn? He asked Hermione, not unkindly, more in the spirit of orientation. Yes, Hermione said, and waited. My dad loves Muggles, Ron said, enthusiastically. He's obsessed with, do you know how planes work? He's been trying to figure that out for years. Hermione blinked once. Then, clearly and with something like relief, aerodynamics. I can explain it if you like. Ron's face opened into a grin. He'd absolutely lose his mind if I came home knowing that. They ended up at the same counter, buying textbooks, and Ron talked about his family with the cheerful prolixity of someone who has never had to perform their past, who likes their own life and assumes others will find it interesting too, which Harry found enormously refreshing. He talked about his brothers and their various disasters, about Hogwarts, about Quidditch with the fervor of genuine religion. Hermione asked targeted questions and he answered them readily. By the time they were done with the bookshop, he'd offered to introduce them to his parents. Molly Weasley was a small woman who communicated in certainties. The certainty that children should be fed. The certainty that school supplies must be checked off a list. The certainty that Harry Potter's name, when she heard it, warranted a specific look, a searching, emotional look that lasted a second longer than a glance and carried something in it that might have been grief, or memory, or both. She looked at the two of them standing together, and then she did something nobody had done to Harry before. She put her hand on his shoulder, briefly, warmly, with the completeness of touch that some people have who are entirely comfortable showing care. "You'll be all right," she said, which was not an answer to any question anyone had asked, but felt like one. Harry thought, yes. The Hogwarts Express left at 11, which was long enough to establish patterns for the trip up. They found a compartment, third from the end, Hermione's choice, because it was quieter there, and Harry stowed their trunks and Hermione opened a book, and this was already normal, this was already the shape of them, until Ron knocked on the door 20 minutes into the journey holding a small paper bag of chocolate frogs and asked if he could sit with them. Harry looked at Hermione, who looked at Harry, which was a half-second exchange that communicated several things silently, which Ron observed with obvious curiosity. "Sure," Harry said. Ron sat, which turned out to be good, because Ron had a chocolate frog card of Dumbledore that he explained in such animated and thoroughly researched detail that Hermione immediately wanted to read more about alchemy, and Harry learned more about his headmaster in 20 minutes than he'd gathered from any book. "What do you know about soul bonds?" Harry asked Ron, midway through the journey, because Ron had been to an all-magical household his whole life and there was no reason not to ask. Ron choked on a chocolate frog. After he'd recovered, like actual soul bonds. "Those are real." "Yes," Harry said. Ron looked at him, then at Hermione, then back at Harry, with the expression of someone doing arithmetic in his head and coming up with an answer that shouldn't be right. "You're not," he started. "We think the founders encoded it," Hermione said, with no particular hesitation. She'd long since decided that truth told plainly was preferable to managed disclosure. Foundational resonance. The wands harmonized this morning. Ron sat back against the compartment wall and looked at the ceiling. "Blimey," he said, to nobody in particular. "Then, my mum knows about this stuff. Old magic. She'd probably be," he looked at them again. The calculation in his expression had settled into something else, something that Harry recognized as the specific look of someone choosing a side. "Does anyone else know?" "Ollivander," Harry said. "And presumably Dumbledore at some point," Hermione said. "He sent a letter." "Right," Ron said. He nodded once, the nod of someone reaching a decision. "Well. I'm not telling anyone until you say so, then." He picked up another chocolate frog. "You should probably know that Fred and George, my brothers, they're fourth years, and they know everything that happens at Hogwarts about 3 days before it actually happens. If you need information, they're useful." He paused. "Also absolutely terrible and occasionally dangerous, but mostly useful." Harry smiled. It was the kind of smile that meant, "You're going to be all right." Ron smiled back. His ears were still faintly pink, but he looked settled, the way people look when they've decided they belong somewhere. Hermione lowered her book to study Ron for a moment with the evaluating eye of someone adjusting a filing system. Then she said, "You're actually quite perceptive." "Don't sound so surprised," Ron said. "I'm not," she said, and meant it. The castle appeared through the darkness across the lake as the boats moved, and Harry had the immediate, vertiginous sensation of recognition, not as memory, because he'd never been here in this body in this life, but as the specific recognition of a place that your entire life has been oriented toward without your knowing it. The towers rose from the rock above the water, windows lit amber, massive and real and ancient in a way that went far deeper than stone. Beside him in the boat, Hermione had stopped pretending to talk and was simply looking. The bond glowed. Not the subtle everyday warmth of its usual state, glowed, actively, deliberately, as if the castle's proximity had answered something. Harry felt it settle around his heart like the last piece of a sentence clicking into place, and thought, with a clarity that he'd remember for the rest of his life, home. He didn't say it aloud. He didn't need to. Hermione's hand found his in the dark of the boat, the careful, aware touch they'd developed over 2 years of managing the bond's intensity, and she pressed his knuckles once, and he felt through the bond that she was thinking the same word. Ron, beside them, politely looked at the castle. The Sorting Hat sat on a stool at the front of the great hall and regarded the first years with the patient composure of a thing that has done this for 1,000 years and has no strong feelings about the process one way or another. The great hall was vast and luminous and entirely alive, candles by the hundreds floating in the ceiling, which opened onto a bewitched sky. Every table turned to look at them as they filed in. Harry felt 1,000 eyes without specifically looking at any of them, and was aware, distantly, of his own name running through the room like a current. He looked at the staff table. Dumbledore sat at the center, elderly, magnificent, with half-moon spectacles and a beard that somehow gave the impression of being entirely comfortable with being exactly what it was. He was watching Harry with an expression that was simultaneously warm and measuring, the look of a man who has been anticipating something for a long time and is now assessing whether the anticipation was accurate. Harry met his eyes for a moment. He didn't look away. Dumbledore's expression shifted, just slightly. He picked up his goblet and drank from it, and the measuring look did not go away. To Dumbledore's left, a man in a turban was watching Harry with a fixed, slightly too intent attention that lasted several seconds past comfortable. His eyes were wide and his hands were folded on the table, and there was something about the quality of his stillness that was not the stillness of rest but of effort. To Dumbledore's right, a man with lank black hair and the kind of face that used its expressions like a miser uses money, sparingly, only when necessary, was looking at Harry with something that was harder to read. Not the fixed fascination of the turban man. More like, assessment. The analytical, almost contemptuous attention of someone evaluating a variable they haven't fully categorized yet. Harry filed all of this. They called surnames alphabetically, and Hermione went early, Granger, Hermione, and she walked to the stool with the composure of someone who is afraid and refuses to show it, which Harry could tell because of the temperature drop in the bond, the slight tightening in the connection's warmth. He thought, "You're fine," quietly, the way they communicated now without speaking. He felt her register it. She sat on the stool and the hat dropped over her eyes and went still for a moment, longer than most, which was already unusual, and then said, in its resonant, carrying voice, "Gryffindor." The Gryffindor table erupted. The warmth in the bond surged back to full strength. Potter, Harry came after several more names, and Harry walked to the stool through a silence that had a different texture from the one that had greeted other students, heavier, loaded, expectant. He sat down. The hat settled over his head. In the darkness, a voice spoke directly into his thoughts, dry and curious and very old. "Well, I haven't felt anything like this in quite some time." "No." Harry thought. "You've been here before, in a sense. Your magical core has been augmented. Structured." A pause. The bond. Foundational resonance, as the old texts call it. The Gryffindor line, yes, I recognize it. And the girl carries Ravenclaw's mark. Godric and Rowena. How extraordinary. "Where should I go?" Harry asked. "Where do you think?" The hat said, with something that sounded almost like humor. Gryffindor, Harry thought. Not because it was his house by blood, or because Hermione was there, though both were true. But because the warmth in the bond was Gryffindor-shaped, brave and direct and unafraid of the thing it was walking toward. At last, the hat said, and raised its brim, and said aloud, "Gryffindor." The table erupted again, louder this time, and Harry walked toward the noise and found Hermione already standing, and she was grinning, really grinning, the full unguarded version she reserved for things she was genuinely delighted about, and she didn't hug him because they were still calibrating the bond in crowds, but she grabbed his wrist for a second and the connection lit up like the flourish and blots candles multiplied by 1,000, and the kids around them went quiet for just a moment, feeling something shift in the air. Percy Weasley, sitting nearby, glanced at them with slightly widened eyes. Ron, sorted shortly after, a brief hat consultation, Gryffindor, enormous twin-led applause, slid into the seat on Harry's other side and immediately started talking about Gryffindor's Quidditch record, and the feast appeared on the tables in a way that was so sudden and complete it seemed less like the food arriving and more like the tables simply deciding to express their food, and the great hall filled with noise and warmth. Harry ate. He was aware of the staff table in his peripheral vision, of Dumbledore watching them with that warm, calculating attention, of the turban man's too fixed gaze, of the black-haired man, Snape, someone had said, potions professor, terrifying, apparently, eating with the air of someone working through something privately. He was aware of Hermione on his left cataloguing the enchantment on the ceiling and simultaneously eating and talking to a girl named Lavender Brown about the mechanisms of magical weather control. He was aware of the castle around them, vast and breathing and awake, humming with something that answered the bond like a low note answers a high one. He thought, something is wrong with the turban man. He didn't know why he thought it. The bond gave him no specific information, no dramatic revelation, just a low-grade alertness, the feeling of standing near something that looks like a shape you recognize but isn't quite right. Like a door that hangs a millimeter off its frame. He filed it. He ate. He talked to Ron about Quidditching and to Hermione about the ceiling and to Percy Weasley briefly about house rules, and when the feast ended and they were moving through the castle to the dormitories he said nothing about the turban man yet. But he remembered. At the top of the moving staircase, Hermione turned and looked at him in the dimness of the stone corridor, and he raised his eyebrows slightly, and she nodded once, because she'd felt it through the bond, the alertness, the not quite rightness, the filed thing. The turban man, she thought at him without speaking. Quirrell, he thought back. She nodded again. Then the staircase moved and they were carried apart to their separate dormitories, and Harry lay in his four-poster bed and looked at the ceiling and felt the bond glowing steadily in his chest and thought, Hogwarts was exactly what it was supposed to be. So were they. Chapter 3, The Language of Ancient Magic. The first week at Hogwarts taught Harry two things simultaneously, that magic, taught properly, was even more extraordinary than he'd imagined, and that most of the people teaching it had no idea what to do with him. Not in a bad way. Not in the way the Dursleys hadn't known what to do with him, which was a problem of contempt and fear. This was a different thing, the specific discomfort of professors who had prepared their lesson plans for children who were beginning, and who encountered instead a boy who wasn't quite beginning, who had been doing something with magic for 2 years in a London library and who came to class not as an empty vessel but as something already partially formed. They felt it the way you feel a draft in a room, not quite sure where it's coming from, not quite sure what to do about it. Hermione had the same problem, differently shaped. Her problem was that she understood everything they were taught on the first explanation and asked questions the second day that were meant for the third week, which made some professors uncomfortable and others genuinely interested. Together, they were a particular kind of challenge. Charms was first, and Professor Flitwick was tiny and enthusiastic and had the specific gift of a teacher who genuinely loves his subject, which made him better than most at noticing things. He set them to levitating feathers, Wingardium Leviosa, swish and flick, the wrist motion as important as the word, and Harry held his wand and felt the spell before he said it, the shape of the magic already familiar in the way the dreams had made some things familiar, and the feather rose on the first attempt, smoothly, without trembling. Flitwick came to his table immediately. He watched the feather for a moment, then said, Mr. Potter, how long have you been practicing? I haven't, sir, Harry said. Not this spell. Flitwick's eyes moved to the feather, which was turning slowly in the air above Harry's wand, and then to Harry's face. Interesting, he said, in a way that meant he intended to think about this more later. Hermione's feather was up 2 seconds after Harry's, turning in the same slow, controlled arc, and Flitwick looked between the two of them with an expression that had passed straight through pleased and come out the other side into something more complex. Across the room, Ron was thwacking his feather with his wand in a way that suggested he was less interested in levitation than in seeing what would happen if he hit it hard enough. The feather moved. Not upward, but it moved. Bushy-haired girl said it was swish and flick, Ron muttered, catching Harry's eye. Swish and flick, she said it very loudly. She says everything loudly, Harry said. She's not wrong though, is she? Harry's feather did a neat loop. Not usually, he said. Transfiguration was McGonagall, and McGonagall was a different category entirely. She was waiting for them when they came in, already there, already watching the door, which meant she'd been a cat on the desk for some time before they arrived, just to make a point. The transformation from cat to professor was instantaneous and complete and accomplished with the economy of motion of someone who has done something so many times that it requires no effort at all. Several students made involuntary noises. Harry simply watched, and Hermione's hand moved to her notebook. McGonagall talked about transfiguration as both art and science, dangerous and precise, and Harry felt the bond stir at the word dangerous, not in warning, but in interest, the way it did when it recognized something adjacent to what it was made of. When they were set to turning matchsticks into needles, Harry held the matchstick and thought about what it wanted to be, not what he wanted it to be, but what it already was, some essential matchstick nest that could be redirected, the same way you redirect a river rather than create one from nothing. He thought of it as a conversation, not a command. The matchstick became a needle between 2 seconds and 3. Not fully, there was still a faint grain to it that was wood rather than metal, but mostly, decisively a needle. He looked up. McGonagall was standing at the front watching him. He found that he could hold her gaze. There was something about McGonagall's attention that demanded it. She looked at you like you'd better be worth looking at, and the way to respond to that was not to flinch but to be worth it. Mr. Potter, she said. Has anyone in your family shown a particular aptitude for transfiguration? Not that I know of, Professor. A fractional pause. You didn't perform the incantation. I was trying something, he said. I can do it with the incantation if you prefer. Another pause, longer. Then, continue as you were, she said, and moved on. Hermione's needle was perfect, metal throughout, sharp, cool. She was staring at it with the satisfaction of someone for whom things working correctly was both expected and pleasing. You didn't use the incantation either, Harry said quietly. I know, she said. I thought about the structure, the molecular composition, essentially, the way the carbon in the wood is already adjacent to the iron in the matchstick head. She stopped. Is that odd? No, Harry said. I thought about what it wanted to be. They looked at each other. The bond hummed. We're doing the same thing, she said, from different directions. Yeah, Harry said. McGonagall gave them each points and said nothing else, but her eyes followed them for the rest of the lesson with the measured, intelligent attention of someone building a file. Potions was Snape, and Snape was a problem. Not an obvious problem. Nothing as simple as malice, though there was that too, or at least something in the same neighborhood. More like a very sharp instrument pointed in an uncertain direction, and the uncertain direction included Harry in its arc. He swept in and set down his things and looked at the class with eyes like black glass that absorbed light and returned nothing, and then he said, Potter. Not Mr. Potter. Just Potter, the way you say a word you've been waiting to say. Here, Harry said. Snape looked at him for a long moment, the full weight of the man's intelligence pointed at him like a beam, and Harry looked back and did not drop his gaze, and something passed between them that was not yet conflict but was in the same building. Fame isn't everything, Snape said, which was the end of the sentence he'd apparently been composing on his way in. No, Harry said. It's not. Snape blinked. Just once. The sentence had not landed the way the sentence was designed to land. It was built to produce embarrassment or defiance, and it had produced neither, just a calm agreement that somehow took all the air out of it. Hermione, beside Harry, was writing the date at the top of her potions notes with the careful deliberateness of someone who is making sure not to look up. Snape asked his rapid-fire questions, the ones designed to expose ignorance in front of the class, and Harry answered 3 of the 4 because he'd read ahead, actually read the textbook rather than just having it, and the 4th one Hermione answered before he'd fully decided whether he knew it. Mr. Potter and Miss Granger, Snape said, are not the only students in this room. No, sir, Hermione said. But you asked the question. The class went very quiet. Snape looked at Hermione with an expression that was simultaneously recognizing something and not enjoying the recognition. He moved on. Later, when they were actually brewing, a simple potion, a remedy for boils, the kind of thing that rewarded precision over intuition, Harry found that potions worked best when he was paying attention to the thing itself rather than the instructions. The instructions were a map, but the territory was the actual substances in the cauldron, and they had properties and preferences and small communications in the way they moved and changed color and produced or failed to produce heat. He listened to those instead. His potion was right. Snape stood over it for a long moment without saying anything, which Harry discovered was a more meaningful response than he'd expected, because Snape had had plenty to say about everyone else's. Acceptable, Snape said, finally. Harry looked at it. It was better than acceptable, actually, but he didn't say that. He'd learned that there were battles worth having and battles that were just noise, and responding to Snape's minimalism with an argument fell firmly into the noise category. What do you think his problem is? Ron asked on the way out. He knew my father, Harry said. Ron glanced at him. How do you know that? The way he said my name, Harry said. It's not about me. Ron thought about this for a moment. That's not very fair. No, Harry agreed. But it's what it is. Hermione had been quiet through this exchange, which meant she was thinking about something more specific. Harry waited. His technique is extraordinary, she said. Did you see the way he held his stirring rod? The angle, it's almost perfectly consistent with what the textbook says maximizes counterclockwise distribution. He's been doing this for 20 years and he's still precise about the small things. She paused. He's not lazy. He's just, the way he's directing his attention isn't random. He hates Harry, Ron said. He knew Harry's father, Hermione said. Which is a very specific thing, and probably a painful one. That doesn't excuse it. But it explains the shape of it. Harry said nothing. He thought, she's right, and also, she notices the right things, and also, I'm very glad she's here. The defense against the dark arts classroom smelled of garlic. Aggressively, inescapably, eye-wateringly of garlic, bundles of it hanging from every available surface, strung from the rafters, piled on the shelves, filling the room with a pungent certainty that made several students physically recoil at the door. Professor Quirrell was a slight man with a nervous manner that expressed itself in small ways, the flutter of his hands when he turned pages, the way he started slightly at unexpected sounds, the habitual quality of his stutter that worked like a fence keeping people at a specific distance. He talked about vampires and hags and his encounter with a werewolf in a way that had the sound of a story practiced so many times it had become independent from whatever it had originally been attached to. He waved his hands. He rearranged his turban. He said PP perhaps and WWL and now T then with such regularity that Ron had started tracking the stutters with small pencil marks in his notebook and was now several pages in. Harry paid attention to different things. The turban was wool, wrapped with the care of something that was also a concealment. Quirrell's eyes, when he thought he wasn't being watched, lost the fluttery anxiousness and went still. When he spoke about dark creatures, there was a moment, brief, a few seconds only, where his voice changed register, dropped half a tone, lost the stutter entirely, before he caught himself and put it back on. The Bond noticed these things the way it noticed things on the edges of Harry's awareness, not alarming him, exactly, but keeping a low heat near the place in his chest where he filed problems. He said nothing. He listened to the lesson and took notes, and when Quirrell looked at him with those two fixed eyes Harry met the look with a steady, entirely unrevealing attention. After class, walking up to the library, did you feel that? Hermione was quiet for 2 steps. Yes, she said. Something's wrong with him. The bond gets, it's like static, near him. Low level. The way a radio goes when you're near something that's generating interference. Interference, Harry said, trying the word. Yeah. That's exactly right. We should be careful what we do near him, Hermione said. I don't think he knows what the bond is. But I think, whatever's wrong with him, it might be sensitive to magic like ours. Which means we're visible to it, Harry said. Which means we're visible to it, Hermione agreed. They were quiet for a moment, moving up the staircase. The turban, Ron said, appearing on the step behind them. He'd been trailing close enough to follow the conversation but far enough to maintain plausible deniability. He looked slightly pale. There's something under the turban. Harry and Hermione both stopped walking and looked at him. Ron said, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. There's something under the turban. The way it sits, and it smells like garlic specifically, which is significant, I'm told, for certain kinds of dark, Ron, Hermione said. Right, he said. Library. Researching. Yes. Sorry. The library at Hogwarts was magnificent in a way that made the Magnolia Road Library feel like a very good beginning. It had 17 sections, restricted and unrestricted, and smelled of centuries and ink and the specific dry electric quality of many thousands of spells preserved in written form. Madame Pants moved between the shelves with the proprietorial energy of someone who views readers as a necessary but somewhat regrettable requirement of having books, and regarded Hermione's first visit with the specific suspicion she seemed to reserve for students who actually knew what they were looking for. Hermione had a list. She always had a list. The list this time contained references to soul bonds and post-medieval magical scholarship, the founding history of Hogwarts with specific attention to enchantments of a permanent foundational nature, anything relating to the concept of foundational resonance, and a separate note at the bottom that read, protective enchantments possible against detection of magical cores. Followed by 2 question marks. Harry pulled a chair up next to her and they worked in the comfortable silence they'd developed over 2 years, Hermione reading with focused intensity and Harry skimming differently, not looking for specific information but waiting to feel which pages were relevant, which was a method that Hermione had documented and labeled intuitive indexing and found deeply frustrating to watch but impossible to argue with because it worked. He found it in a book called The Architecture of Ancient Magic, Foundations and Fortifications, a thick volume that clearly hadn't been opened in at least 15 years, based on the state of the spine. He didn't find it by reading the index. He found it because the bond pulsed when he ran his finger along the shelf and went still at the spine. He pulled it down and opened it to page 342. The Founder's Concordance, the chapter heading said. On the matter of successor souls. He set it flat on the table. Hermione's hand stopped moving across her page. They read it together, and for 3 minutes neither of them spoke. The chapter described something the author called the Concordance, an enchantment designed by all 4 founders together, the only magic they had worked collaboratively, in the early years of Hogwarts when they were still more united than divided. It was a fail-safe. A recognition, apparently, that the kind of magic Hogwarts was built to teach could, if concentrated in the wrong hands, unmake as much as it made. The Concordance was designed to find, across generations, across centuries, 2 souls carrying the specific magical signatures of complementary founder bloodlines. Not direct descendants, necessarily, but magical echoes, people in whom founders' magic had pooled by the slow accumulation of magical generations, the way rivers pool in valleys. When those 2 souls touched, when the magic recognized its own pattern in another, the bond would form. Not a love enchantment. The text was very clear about this, with the slightly exasperated specificity of someone correcting a common mistake. Not a love enchantment, not a compulsion, not a binding in any restricting sense. More like, a key fitting a lock, and the lock being a door, and the door opening onto a room that had always existed but had required both of them to be accessible. The bond would amplify and stabilize their magic. It would teach them, gradually, the deep magic the founders had built Hogwarts on top of. It would, in times of genuine magical threat, the text used the phrase when the balance shifts toward ruin, respond as a counterweight. It was, the author said, the most sophisticated piece of ambient magic ever documented. The last paragraph read, the concordance was designed with the specific understanding that the bonded pair would not hide. The enchantment draws power from acknowledgement, from the act of the bonded choosing, freely, repeatedly, with full knowledge, to remain connected. It diminishes under concealment and grows under use. Secrecy kills it. Honesty feeds it. Hermione sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. Harry looked at the page. The bond between them was running at full heat, the warmest he'd felt it since their wands had sung in Ollivander's shop. Honesty feeds it, Hermione said. That explains a lot, Harry said. 2 years, she said. 2 years of telling each other the truth about everything, about the Dursleys, about the dreams, about what the magic was doing, and the bond just kept getting stronger. She looked at him. We were feeding it without knowing. We were doing it anyway, Harry said. It wasn't for the bond. Hermione looked at him with brown eyes that had gone slightly too serious for a Hogwarts library on a Thursday afternoon. No, she said. It wasn't. Ron appeared from around a shelf with a book about dark artifacts tucked under his arm. Did you find something? He said. Then he saw their faces. You found something. Harry pushed the book toward him. Ron read the open page with his lips moving slightly and his expression cycling through several phases. So you're basically a founder's magical weapon, he said. That's a very reduced reading of a complex text, Hermione said. But not wrong, Ron said. A pause. Harry looked at him. Ron had gone slightly pale, the way he went when something was funny and also genuinely alarming, and after a moment he just started laughing, not unkindly, but with the genuine hilarity of someone confronted with an absurdity so large it had come back around to funny. Only you, he said to Harry. Only you would turn up at Hogwarts, already basically a historical prophecy. It wasn't my plan, Harry said. I know, that's what makes it brilliant, Ron said. The confrontation with Draco happened on a Thursday in the 3rd week of October, on the 3rd floor corridor, which everyone knew was out of bounds, though the specific reason for that was still a matter of speculation. Harry and Hermione had not been going to the 3rd floor corridor. They'd been in the corridor adjacent to it, which was entirely permitted, returning from the library after dinner, when Draco Malfoy and his 2 large companions came around a corner with the specific energy of people who had been waiting. Not ambush waiting, exactly, it was too public for that, torches in the wall sconces, a suit of armor behind them that had been polishing itself earlier. More like the confrontational energy of someone who has been building toward a conversation and has finally engineered the circumstances. Draco looked at Harry. He had the practiced composure of someone who has decided this is a formal occasion and intends to behave accordingly. His friends, Crabbe and Goyle, a matched set in everything except height, stood slightly behind him in the manner of people who are present more as atmosphere than participants. Potter, Draco said. Malfoy, Harry said. Draco's eyes moved to Hermione briefly, then back. He was doing the calculation Harry had watched him doing in Madame Malkin's, running the available information against his established framework and finding the numbers didn't balance. I've been thinking, Draco said, about what you said. Both of you. In the robe shop. I remember it, Hermione said. My father has certain expectations, Draco said, and something in his voice had shifted slightly from the smooth superiority of that first meeting, just enough to notice. It wasn't quite uncertainty. It was the voice of someone reciting a position they've been given while also privately auditing it. Most people's parents do, Harry said. Draco looked at him with gray eyes that were doing work. He said you'd be exactly what everyone's been fussing about. Famous and useless and riding on a dead mother's magic. Okay, Harry said. Draco seemed to have expected more. He said Muggleborns were. I know what he said, Harry said. You told us at Malkin's. I want to know if it's true, Draco said, and this was the tell, because Draco Malfoy, Harry suspected, did not ask other people whether things were true. He was told things were true, and he repeated them, and he found comfort in the echo. Asking was different. Asking was a crack in the framework. Hermione walked 3 steps forward and held out her hand. We've not properly introduced, she said. I'm Hermione Granger. My parents are Muggle dentists, I'm Muggleborn, I have the highest marks in every class we've had so far, I turned my matchstick into a needle without the incantation on day 2, and I'm going to be the best witch in our year. If those things are a problem for your father, I'd suggest that says considerably more about your father's framework than about me. She said it clearly, without aggression, the way she said everything she believed. Draco stared at her hand for a moment. Then at her face. Then at Harry, who was watching the exchange with the particular calm of someone who has seen Hermione do this before and knows exactly how it ends, not with a fight, not with a concession, but with something harder to deal with than either, a question the other person can't stop thinking about. You're actually serious, Draco said. Not to Hermione. To the air between them. She's very serious, Harry said. It's actually one of her better qualities. Excuse me, Hermione said, I have several better qualities. You also just listed your own achievements to a stranger, Harry said. It was contextually appropriate, she said. Draco had not taken her hand. But he hadn't stepped back either, and his 2 large companions were looking between the scene and each other with the mild befuddlement of people who had expected a different kind of evening. I'll think about it, Draco said, finally. About what? Harry said. Draco's jaw tightened slightly. About whether my father is right about everything, he said, which was clearly not a sentence he'd planned to say and had come out anyway, and cost him something to say it, and Harry respected that even though he didn't say so. Draco turned and left, Crabbe and Goyle falling in behind him. Ron appeared from around the corner, where he had clearly been standing the entire time. I was waiting to help, he said, but it seemed like you had it. We had it, Harry confirmed. He's not actually terrible, Ron said, looking in the direction Draco had gone with the reluctant expression of someone revising a held opinion. He's been told he's better than everyone since birth, but there's something in there that isn't fully decided yet. Yes, Hermione said. She was looking in the same direction. That's what makes him interesting and also what makes him dangerous. Dangerous how? Ron said. Undecided people are the most volatile, she said. They can become almost anything. That's either very good or very bad and there's no way of knowing which yet. Harry looked down the now empty corridor and thought, remember that. He filed it. The mirror of Eriste found Harry, not the other way around. He hadn't been looking for it. He'd been walking, one of the nights when sleep wasn't coming and the dormitory felt close and the bond was a bright quiet hum that wanted him moving rather than still. He'd wrapped himself in the invisibility cloak that had arrived by Owl 3 days before, with a note that said only, "Your father left this with me. Use it well." No signature. The handwriting was the same careful slant he remembered from the letter in February. He went down corridors he hadn't explored yet, feeling the castle the way he'd felt the library, not alarmed by its size, but curious about it, reading the stone through his feet the way you read a room through your body when you've lived in it long enough. The bond was quiet but present, Hermione's warmth a compass needle in his chest that told him where she was without urgency. She was asleep. Good. He found the room on the 4th floor, in a section that felt deliberately forgotten, the kind of emptiness that happens when something is placed somewhere and doors are closed around it, not random but curated. The room was large and cold and dark except for the moonlight from a high window and the object at the center, a tall mirror, ornate, gold-framed, with an inscription along the top that took him a moment to parse. Eriste stra eru oit ube kafru oit onwosi. He looked into it. The mirror showed him a room. Not Privet Drive. Not a crowd of strangers. A room he recognized without having seen it in this life, stone walls, a high ceiling, torchlight, and himself in it. Older, maybe, not hugely, but with the look of someone who had grown into their own face. And beside him, Hermione, also older, her arm through his, both of them looking at something off to the right of the frame, and on his other side Ron, and behind them faces he almost recognized, people he hadn't met yet, and beyond that, the castle, lit and alive and full. Not glory. Not even victory. Just, belonging. Home. He stood there for a long time. Then a voice from the doorway said, gently, I see you found it. Dumbledore came into the room with the unhurried movement of a man who is precisely where he expected to be, carrying a small bag of sweets and wearing deep purple robes that caught the moonlight. He sat down on a nearby step. There was a step there, conveniently, which Harry suspected had not been there before Dumbledore arrived, and offered the bag. Sherbet lemon. Harry looked at him. He took a sherbet lemon. You knew I'd find it. I wondered, Dumbledore said. The castle tends to show people what they need to see when they need to see it. The mirror and I have an understanding on this point. He nodded toward it. What do you see? Harry considered whether to tell the truth. It took about 2 seconds. Honesty feeds it. People I belong to, he said. Being somewhere that's mine. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Something in his expression did a complicated thing. Not glory, he said. Not power. Why would I want those? Harry said, genuinely. Dumbledore looked at him with the blue eyes that saw several things at once and was quiet again, but differently, the quiet of someone who has been moving toward a certain kind of conversation and has found the conversation is already different from what he expected. Most people who look into this mirror, Dumbledore said, see what they lack. What they hunger for most deeply. The desires they cannot name in daylight. I don't lack those things, Harry said. He looked at the mirror. I mean, I don't have them yet. But they're not impossible. They're just, coming. The bond shows me that. He paused. It's not the mirror, not entirely. The mirror is just agreeing. A very long silence. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that was, Harry couldn't fully name it. Some mixture of relief and something more complicated. Of being deeply glad about something and also, underneath, not quite sure how to hold it. You know about the bond, Harry said. It was not a question. I have, some understanding of it, Dumbledore said carefully. Ollivander told you. Ollivander wrote to me, yes. After your visit. Dumbledore's fingers moved over the sweet bag. Harry, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that your answer doesn't change anything about my regard for you or your place here. All right, Harry said. Are you frightened of it? Dumbledore said. Of what the bond is. Of what it might ask of you. Harry thought about it honestly. No, he said. I was, maybe, at the beginning, not frightened exactly, but, it was very big and I was 9. But it's never been cruel. It's never taken anything. He paused. It's only ever added. Dumbledore made a small sound that might, in another setting, have been something close to a laugh, except it was too full of feeling for pure amusement. Of course, he said, quietly. What do you know about it? Harry said. About the concordance. Dumbledore looked at him steadily. More than most, he said. Less than I'd like. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Godric Gryffindor's notes on the subject are held in this school's restricted section, sealed. I have not opened them. It felt, perhaps, too much like reading someone else's letter. Could we see them? Harry said. Hermione and I. Another pause, longer. Dumbledore turned the sweet bag between his fingers. I think, he said, slowly, that they were written for you. Specifically. And that I may have been keeping them under lock out of, caution is the polite word. Perhaps something less flattering is more accurate. He looked at Harry. I don't know what the bond will become. That uncertainty is, not comfortable, for a man accustomed to knowing the shapes of things. I don't think anyone's supposed to know, Harry said. Not even us. I think that's the point. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, I'll have the seal removed. He stood, collected his sherbet lemons, and moved toward the door. Then he stopped. Harry, he said. The third-floor corridor is genuinely dangerous. Whatever you and Miss Granger may feel about your capabilities, and I don't doubt them, there are things in this castle that would harm you. Please take care. What's in the third-floor corridor? Harry said. Dumbledore smiled at him, the warm, genuine version, not the managing one. A door, he said. Behind which something very important is being kept safe. He paused. I thought it better that you know that much. The uncertainty of not knowing can sometimes be more dangerous than the knowledge itself. He left. Harry turned and looked at the mirror one more time, his future self and Hermione and Ron and all those people he hadn't met yet, in a castle that was home, and felt the bond pulse once, warm and sure, and thought, I know. He went back to Gryffindor Tower. Hermione was awake. She was sitting in the common room in her school robes with a blanket over her shoulders and 3 books open on the table around her, and she looked up when he came in through the portrait hole and pulled off the cloak and said, Was it worth it? Yes, he said. He sat down across from her and told her about the mirror and about Dumbledore and about Gryffindor's sealed notes, and she listened with the complete quality of attention she gave important things, and when he was done she was quiet for a moment. He's afraid of it, she said. Not of us, Harry said. Of not understanding it. That's a type of fear, she said. Specifically the type that causes people to make choices that look like caution and are actually control. She paused. I'm not criticizing him. I have the same instinct. When I don't understand something I want to contain it until I do. She looked at her books. But we shouldn't let him do that to us. No, Harry said. We're going to get those notes, she said. Not a question. First thing, he said. She nodded. Closed 2 of the 3 books. Looked at him across the table in the low light of the common room where the fire had burned down to red coals, and said, The mirror. What did you see? He told her. The bond, between them, ran at full warmth. She looked at the fire for a moment. I've been seeing the same thing, she said. Not the mirror, just in the mornings. When the bond is strongest. I didn't say because, she stopped. Because? Because I didn't want to make it strange, she said. We were 9 when it started and we've been careful with it, and I didn't want to, she stopped again. Hermione Granger, who was never at a loss for words, was losing them. Hermione, Harry said. It's not strange. She looked at him. We're 11. We've been whatever this is since we were 9, he said. That doesn't need a different name right now. It just needs to be what it is. A very long moment. The fire crackled. Outside the common room windows, the grounds were dark and enormous. Okay, she said, quietly. Then, with the briskness that meant she'd processed something and filed it, we need to read those notes. And we need to figure out what's in the third-floor corridor. And Quirrell is definitely something, Harry agreed. Right, she said. Tomorrow. She gathered her books and went up to the dormitory, and Harry sat in the dying warmth of the fire with the bond glowing in his chest and thought, something is coming. He couldn't name the shape of it yet, but it was moving, gaining definition, the way a storm gathers definition on the horizon before it arrives. He was not afraid. He went to bed, and in the night the bond hummed the familiar double beat, and somewhere in his dreams Godric Gryffindor said, very clearly, when it comes, don't hesitate. Harry thought, I know. He woke up ready. Chapter 4, The weight of old promises. The troll was Hermione's fault, technically. Not in the way the story would later be told, not the version Ron told his brothers, which involved considerably more heroism and considerably less specific detail, and not the version Hermione told her parents at Christmas, which was accurate but strategically compressed. It was her fault in the specific, true way that things that go slightly sideways are usually the result of someone doing the right thing in the wrong sequence. She'd gone to the bathroom. Alone. After overhearing something she wasn't supposed to overhear, specifically, Snape in the third-floor corridor, speaking in a low, urgent tone to someone Harry and Hermione hadn't been able to identify, the conversation reaching them as fragments through a door that was slightly ajar while they were returning Gryffindor's notes to their bag, won't be able to keep it forever, three-headed, don't know how much longer. She'd been distressed. More distressed than she'd shown Harry, actually, which she confessed later. She'd felt the bond spike with something sharp and urgent and she'd needed a moment to process without the connection running at full volume, which was what it did when they were both feeling something simultaneously. So she'd said she was going ahead, and she'd gone to the first-floor girls' bathroom, and she'd been there when the troll had come in. Harry had known almost immediately. He'd been walking back to the feast with Ron, following the alert and moving energy of students being herded by prefects in response to Quirrell's announcement, the troll, in the dungeons, the screaming, the very loud organizational chaos of a castle trying to evacuate 600 children, when the bond dropped. Not the warmth dropping. The warmth was still there, steady and present. What dropped was the quality of it. It went from its normal even hum to something with edges, something that said, "Here, this is where, come now." The way a beacon is different from ambient light. The way a shout is different from a voice. Harry stopped walking in the middle of a corridor full of moving students and said, "She's not at the feast." Ron was already looking at him with the expression he'd developed for bond-related information, the rapid processing look, ears going slightly pink. "Where is she?" "First floor," Harry said. "Girls' bathroom, north side. The one near the charms corridor." He was already moving. The troll was supposed to be in the dungeons, Ron said, moving with him, because Ron had decided some weeks ago that when Harry and Hermione went somewhere quickly his job was to go with them, a decision Harry thought showed excellent judgment. "Supposed to be," Harry said. The bond was running like a current now, directional and insistent, and Harry followed it through the emptied corridors with the complete confidence of a compass needle, no hesitation, no wrong turns. He felt Hermione through it, she wasn't panicking, which told him she'd registered his approach, she'd felt him coming through the connection, and she was doing the thing she did under pressure, which was go very still and think very fast. Good. The smell hit them before the sounds did, the wrong, heavy smell of something large and unclean that had come inside from somewhere it didn't belong. Then the sounds, the deliberate, unmistakable crashes of something enormous in a small space, not rage but exploration, the curiosity of a creature that has found a new environment and is investigating it by breaking it. Harry pushed the door. The bathroom was mostly rubble. 3 of the 4 sinks had been knocked from their moorings and lay in various states of destruction across the tiled floor. The mirror above them was in pieces. 2 of the stall doors had been reduced to splinters. The troll, 12 feet of gray-green muscle and warty skin that smelled like concentrated wrongness, was standing in the center of it all with a club the size of a tree trunk, looking at the far corner with the mild interest of something that has not yet decided whether it's done. Hermione was in the far corner. Standing. Not crouched, not cowering, standing with her back to the wall and her wand in her hand, which was extended with a steadiness that Harry noted with something that was pride and was also specifically not the time for pride, and she'd clearly just cast something because the troll's left foot was encased in what appeared to be rapidly hardening stone up to the ankle, which had slowed it but not stopped it. She looked at Harry when he came in. The bond surged, relief and fury and determination, and she said, completely steadily, "Its skin is thick. Direct spells don't penetrate. I've been trying to find something it can't just ignore." "The club," Harry said. He was already reading the scene the way the bond helped him read scenes, not just seeing it but feeling the shape of it, where the weight was, where the leverage was. "If we take the club, it'll use its hands instead, they're proportionally worse," she said. "Not take it away." Make it use its own club against itself. He looked at the troll. At the club. At the low ceiling above the troll's head. Can you get its attention? Hermione looked at him for a half-second with the expression she used when she was evaluating an idea very quickly and deciding it was right. Then she pointed her wand at the rubble near the troll's feet and said, Wingardium Leviosa, and a large piece of broken zinc launched itself at the troll's face. The troll turned. It roared. It swung the club. Harry was already moving, not toward the troll but around it, to the right, where the ceiling was lowest and the space was tightest. He pointed his wand at the club as it swung and said, not the incantation but the intention, the word forming in his mind and mouth simultaneously, impedimenta, and the momentum of the club inverted, not stopped but reversed, and it came down on the troll's own head with the full force the troll had put into the swing. The sound was genuinely extraordinary. The troll sat down heavily, which was a process involving several hundred kilograms of muscle and confusion, and then lay back, club rolling away, with the expression of something that had just encountered an unexpected problem. Ron, from the doorway, let out a sound that was not quite a word. That was, quick, Harry said. Bind its legs before it recovers. He was looking at Hermione, who was looking at him, and the bond between them was doing something it had never quite done before, not the warmth, not the directional hum, but a kind of full-frequency brightness, like two instruments that have just discovered they can play the same note simultaneously and the resonance is louder than either expected. Her vinewood wand was already moving. The troll's legs wrapped in something that looked like rope made of light, pulling tight. The door burst open. McGonagall, Quirrell, and Snape came through with the specific velocity of people who have been running, their wands drawn, their expressions cycling rapidly from professional urgency to genuine confusion at the tableau before them. McGonagall looked at the troll. Then at Harry. Then at Hermione. Then at Ron, who was still in the doorway and said, helpfully, "It came at us, Professor. We had to, they had to." Snape's black eyes were moving over the scene with the careful attention he applied to things he didn't yet fully understand. They settled on Harry for a moment and then moved away, and his expression did the controlled and not revealing thing he did when his conclusions were running ahead of what he intended to show. Quirrell was looking at the troll with wide eyes. But then, for 1 second, just one, his eyes moved to Harry, and the stutter was entirely gone. Harry felt the bond give a sharp, specific alert. Then Quirrell blinked and the stutter was back and he was wringing his hands and saying, oh dear, the CH children." Harry looked at Hermione. She had seen it. The bond confirmed it, a pulse of shared recognition, the same note struck on both strings. McGonagall was talking about recklessness and also, in the same breath, about the exceptional circumstances, which meant she was torn between telling them off and being quietly impressed, and resolved it by doing both in a way that ended with points for Gryffindor and a strong suggestion that they return to the feast immediately. Quirrell left before she'd finished. Harry noted that too. They didn't go back to the feast immediately. Ron went. Ron was hungry and the troll had been both exciting and somewhat nauseating and he needed the specific comfort of large amounts of food, which Harry entirely understood. Harry and Hermione walked with him to the entrance to the Great Hall and stopped. You need to eat, Ron said, looking back. In a bit, Harry said. Ron looked between them, the look he'd learned to give when the bond was running something specific and they needed a moment, and then nodded and went in, and Harry and Hermione turned and walked, not yet knowing where they were going, until the direction resolved itself into the staircase going down. The dungeons were empty. Everyone was at the feast or back in dormitories being counted. The corridor was cold and lit with green-tinged torches that made the stone walls look like the bottom of a lake, and their footsteps were the only sound. Hermione said, "What did you feel when it happened?" "Not the alert, after. When we dealt with it." Harry thought about it. "Like, both of us, at the same time. Not me using my magic and you using yours. Like there was one thing and we were both holding it." "Yes," she said. "The book said that. In the Concordance chapter, the bonded pair will, under sufficient conditions, access a unified magical field rather than two separate ones. She paused. I didn't fully understand it when I read it. I think I understand it now. It was loud, Harry said. She smiled at that, just briefly, the genuine version. Incredibly. They walked further. The dungeons opened into a section Harry hadn't been in before, the deeper level, where the corridor narrowed and the torches were fewer and the stone felt older underfoot, the grain of it different. The castle felt awake in a different way down here, not the warm, inhabited aliveness of the upper floors but something more fundamental, the aliveness of foundations, of the deep places where something was built to last. Can you feel that? Hermione said. Yeah, Harry said. The bond is, responding to it, she said. She had her hands slightly out from her sides, not a fighting stance, more like the position you take when you want to feel the air. There's old magic down here. Much older than Hogwarts. Is that possible? The site might predate the building, she said. Rowena's notes talked about, she called it the deep foundation. The place where Gryffindor's notes said the concordance was stored. Not stored like a library, stored like a cornerstone. Built into it. They stopped. In front of them was a section of wall that looked the same as any other section of wall and was completely obviously not. Harry knew this not from seeing but from feeling, the bond ran hot at it, not alarmingly but with the specific warmth of recognition, the way a hand runs warm on a stone that has held sunlight even after dark. This is it, he said. Yes, Hermione said. She reached out and pressed her hand flat against the wall. Harry did the same, 6 inches from her hand, and the moment his palm touched the stone the bond went full bright, not the terrifying brightness of uncontrolled power, but deliberate, like someone opening all the windows in a dark room simultaneously. The stone warmed under his hand. Then it went warm under hers. Then, and this was the part neither of them had expected, the stone between their hands warmed too, a straight line of heat connecting the 2 points like a drawn line, and the wall showed them something. Not a door. Not carvings. More like, a memory. An impression in the stone itself, the way water leaves impressions in rock over centuries. 2 figures, carved or not carved, emerging from the surface in bas-relief for just a moment, a woman and a man, facing each other over the line of warmth between the 2 handprints. Rowena Ravenclaw and Godric Gryffindor, and they were not arguing this time. They were showing them something. The impression lasted maybe 10 seconds before the stone went cool and flat again, but what it showed, Harry could feel it landing in him like a key in a lock, not information exactly but understanding, the kind that lives in the body rather than the mind, the founder's knowledge settling into the bond like sediment settling in still water. Hermione pulled her hand back and looked at it, then at him. Her eyes were very bright. What did you get? Harry said. The 3rd floor corridor, she said immediately. It's a misdirection. Whatever's being protected, the stone, it's not just behind the door. It's layered. The door is the first layer but there are, she stopped, organizing rapidly. Chambers. A sequence. Each one is a different kind of magic, contributed by different professors. Snape. Flitwick. McGonagall, Quirrell, Harry said. She looked at him. Yes, she said. The troll was Quirrell's. Not the one tonight, a troll is Quirrell's contribution to the stone's protection. But Quirrell wouldn't let a troll loose in his own protection unless someone else is directing him, she said. They stood in the cold green light of the dungeon corridor and looked at each other and the same conclusion arrived for both of them at the same moment, the way conclusions arrive in the bond, not quite simultaneous, Hermione a fraction ahead as usual, Harry close enough behind that they were essentially together. Voldemort, Harry said. The word sat in the air between them. Hermione's expression didn't change the way most people's expressions changed at that word, she was looking at the problem, not the name. He's alive, she said. Not fully. Not, in a body. Something attached to Quirrell. That's what the turban conceals. She paused. When you said the interference was like static, a second magical signature, Harry said. On the back of Quirrell's. Two people in one, that's not supposed to be possible, she said. No, Harry said. But he's always been doing things that aren't supposed to be possible. She was quiet for a moment, thinking with the focused urgency she brought to things that mattered. Then, he wants the stone. The Philosopher's Stone, Nicholas Flammel's. Dumbledore must be keeping it here because Gringotts wasn't safe enough, which means Quirrell, Voldemort, has already tried at Gringotts. She looked at him. That break-in at Gringotts in September. When we were on the train, Ron mentioned it. The vault was empty, Harry said. It had already been moved. To Hogwarts, she said. Right. So he's here, in the school, waiting, and the Halloween troll was, a test, Harry said. Or a distraction. Or both. Hermione pressed her lips together, which was what she did when she was angry and channeling it into clarity. We need to tell Dumbledore. We will, Harry said. Tomorrow. Tonight I need to think about how much to tell him. Hermione looked at him. How much to tell him? He knows more than he's said, Harry said. The concordance notes. The mirror. He's managing how much we know, which means he's managing how much we're able to do. I want to be sure we're not walking into a situation where we hand him everything we know and he tells us to go back to class. A pause. Hermione considered this with the honest rigor she applied to things she didn't want to be true but had to evaluate anyway. That's frustrating, she said, but probably accurate. I like him, Harry said. I think he's genuinely trying to do right by us. But the notes were sealed, Hermione. He was managing what we could access. I know, she said. She exhaled. I hate this. Yeah. I hate that the adults we trust are also the adults we have to be strategically honest with. I know, Harry said. She looked at the wall where the stone impression had appeared and disappeared. The founders didn't have this problem, she said. They built the concordance to give us everything. Without an intermediary, Harry said. Yes, she said, quietly. They stood there for a moment in the green cold, and then Hermione straightened her shoulders and said, right. We go to Dumbledore tomorrow. We tell him what we know about Quirrell. We don't tell him about the wall, not yet. The wall is ours. She paused. Is that terrible? It's what the concordance requires, Harry said. Honesty between us. We haven't lied to Dumbledore, we just haven't told him everything, she said. The book said the bonded pair must choose freely, Harry said. Dumbledore knowing everything removes our ability to choose. Hermione looked at him with her evaluating expression. You've thought about this more than I have, she said. I've had more practice thinking about which adults to trust with which parts of myself, he said, and this came out more plainly than he'd intended, and for a moment the Dursleys were in the corridor with them, which they weren't often anymore, but were sometimes. Hermione said nothing for a moment. Then she said, yes. That's fair. She touched his arm briefly, the careful, aware version, and then turned and started walking back toward the stairs. Harry followed, and behind them the deep foundation of Hogwarts settled back into its cold silence, its memory complete. They told Dumbledore in the morning. Or tried to. They went to his office, the gargoyle, the password that Hermione deduced from the bowl of sweets on his desk during their previous conversation, sherbet lemon, spoken to the gargoyle, which was either very obvious or very clever and Harry suspected it was both, and found his office empty with a note on the door in the careful slanted handwriting, called to the ministry on a matter of some importance. Return expected Friday. It was Wednesday. He's been maneuvered away, Hermione said. Harry looked at the note. Yeah. Quirrell, or whoever's directing Quirrell, is working on a timetable, she said. The Halloween distraction. Dumbledore away from the school. She turned and looked at Harry. What do we do? We prepare, Harry said. We have 2 days. For what? For whatever's going to happen, he said. Because I don't think this waits for Friday. They went back to the library. Not for the reasons they usually went to the library, not research, not the comfortable intellectual work of building understanding from text. They went because Ron was there, which was where Ron was on Wednesday evenings, developing what had become a genuine passion for chess strategy that he was applying, with interesting results, to magical theory. We need to talk, Harry said. Ron looked up from his board. He took one look at their faces. Right, he said, and put his pieces away. They found the corner table furthest from Madame Pance's desk, and Harry laid out what they knew in the same systematic way Hermione laid things out, not because he was copying her, but because 2 years of working together had given them a shared organizing structure, a way of presenting information that was clear and complete and fast. Voldemort. Quirrell. The stone. The chambers. Dumbledore away. 2 days. Ron listened with the focused attention he almost never showed in class but brought completely to things he considered real. When Harry finished, Ron sat back and was quiet for a moment, which was unusual enough that both Harry and Hermione waited rather than filling the silence. My brothers know the school better than the professors do, Ron said. Fred and George. They've mapped it, I mean properly mapped it, not the official layout, the actual layout, the passages and secrets, and, he stopped. There's a way into the 3rd floor corridor that doesn't go through the main door. How long would it take them to show us? Harry said. I can ask tonight, Ron said. But Harry, he stopped again. What? Ron looked at him with the warm brown eyes that didn't hide things well. If Voldemort is actually there. In the school. Not a story, not a name, actually there. What are you planning to do? Stop him getting the stone, Harry said. By going into the chambers. If we have to. Ron nodded slowly. He looked at Hermione. And you? Obviously, Hermione said. Ron exhaled. He looked at the chess board he'd packed away. Then he looked back at them with an expression that was, Harry recognized it because he'd seen it once before, when Ron had said, I'm not telling anyone until you say so, on the Hogwarts Express. The expression of someone choosing, consciously, to be somewhere. Right, Ron said. Then I'm going too. Hermione opened her mouth. Don't, Ron said. I know what you're going to say. I know you think I'll be safer up here. I know the plan doesn't require me. But there's a chamber with chess, isn't there? You said McGonagall's contribution was chess. A pause. Probably, Hermione said. I'm the best chess player in the first year, Ron said. Probably in the school. I'm not saying that to show off, I'm saying it because it's relevant. His jaw was set. I have a contribution. I'm coming. Harry looked at him. Then at Hermione. The bond said nothing specific, it was running at its normal warmth, which he'd learned meant that the current situation was not a threat but was a choice, and the choice was his. All right, he said. Ron's shoulders dropped slightly with relief he'd been holding. All right, he said. Good. He picked up his chess pieces again, reorganizing, thinking. Flitwick's contribution is probably a key charm, something physical you have to find magically. McGonagall's is the chess set. Snape's will be logic-based, I'd bet, he'd use something that requires reasoning rather than magic, something that magic can't shortcut. He looked at Hermione. That's yours. Hermione's expression shifted, the slight surprise of someone who has been accurately seen. Yes, she said. And whatever Quirrell's is, it's already been dealt with, Ron said. Because Quirrell wouldn't make his own protection too hard. He'd want to be able to get through it himself. You have thought about this, Harry said. I think about chess, Ron said. And chess is everything. Positioning. Sacrifice. Reading what the other player wants and giving them something that looks like it but isn't. He looked at Harry. What does Voldemort want? The stone, Harry said. What does he actually want? Harry thought about it. The bond was still, which meant this was a question it wanted him to answer with his own mind rather than its input. To not be what he is, Harry said. Dead and not dead. Incomplete. He paused. He wants to be real again. To be fully himself. The stone is a means. So what would you offer him instead, Ron said, if you wanted to stop him for 2 minutes without magic? A long pause. Nothing, Harry said. There's nothing I could offer. That's what I thought, Ron said, and his voice had gone very quiet. Which means when you get down there, Harry, there's no negotiation. There's no moment where he'll listen. Just making sure he doesn't get through. I know, Harry said. Ron picked up his king piece and looked at it for a moment, then set it down in the center of the board. Right, he said. I'll talk to Fred and George tonight. The passage the twins showed them was behind a mirror on the second floor, narrow and cold and smelling of old stone and something that might have been centuries of secret keeping. Fred and George gave the tour with the proprietary pleasure of people sharing something they'd worked hard to acquire. Comes out behind the locked door on the 3rd floor, George said. Completely bypasses the main entrance. We found it second year, the door was already there, we just found the passage. Why didn't you use it? Hermione said. Oh, we thought about it, Fred said. But the door was locked with something that felt, he paused, looking for the word. Heavy, George said. Heavy, Fred agreed. Not like a regular lock. Like something that knows when you're not supposed to be there and is uninterested in your reasons. What changed? Harry said. The twins looked at each other. Word gets around, George said, with careful casualness. About certain first years and there, he gestured generally in the direction of Harry's chest, which was where the bond happened to be. We're not telling anyone, Fred said. Obviously. But if the passage is going to be used for something important, we'd rather know it's being used properly. Will it let us through? Hermione said. Not skeptical, genuinely asking. We think so, George said. The feeling it gives off has been different these last few weeks. Like it's been expecting something. Harry put his hand on the corridor wall. The bond ran warm. Yeah, he thought. It's been expecting us. Thank you, Harry said to the twins. Fred and George exchanged a look that was their primary mode of communication. Then Fred said, Don't die, with the specific lightness that Weasleys used for serious things. We're not planning to, Harry said. Good plan, George said. Stick to it. Thursday was normal in all the ways that mattered and completely not normal underneath. They went to classes. They ate meals. They did homework in the common room while the fire burned and the castle settled around them. But beneath the surface of all of it the bond was running at the specific frequency it ran at when something real was approaching, not the alert spike of immediate threat but the sustained warmth of preparation, the way muscles warm before they're needed. Ron taught Hermione 2 chess sequences after dinner, which she absorbed with frightening speed and then immediately began improving, which Ron found both irritating and impressive. Harry sat beside them and read the Concordance chapter again, the words of the old text settling into him differently now, not as information to be processed but as a kind of instruction, as if the words themselves were activating something the wall had started. The bonded pair operates not merely as amplified individuals but as a unified field. In conditions of genuine threat, the field will access what it needs without being directed. The pair need only commit to the intention and the magic will find the form. He thought about what that meant. Then he thought about the mirror in the room on the 4th floor, his future self and Hermione and Ron and all those people not yet known, and about Rowena Ravenclaw saying they'll be extraordinary and Godric saying they already are. He thought, we're about to find out. He closed the book. Hermione looked up from the chessboard. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. Ron moved his queen 4 squares and said, without looking up, "Tell me again we're ready." "We're ready," Harry said. "Are we, though?" Ron said. "No," Harry said. "But we're going anyway." Ron looked up at that. Then he started laughing, not the helpless kind, not the kind that avoids something, but the genuine kind, the kind that happens when someone says the true thing and the truth is absurd enough to be funny, and Harry laughed too, and after a moment Hermione set down her chess piece and laughed as well, and the common room was warm and full of firelight, and outside the castle the Scottish sky was enormous. The bond between Harry and Hermione ran at full warmth, and below it, in the deep foundation of Hogwarts, in the stone where 2 sets of handprints had left their heat, something very old waited patiently for morning. Chapter 5, The Philosopher's Fire. They went at midnight. Not because midnight was dramatic, Harry had no particular investment in dramatic timing, but because midnight was when the patrol schedules had their longest gap, a 30-minute window that Fred and George had mapped with the same obsessive precision they applied to anything they considered worth knowing. Filch went north at 11:45. Mrs. Norris, operating independently, was consistently in the east wing between 11 and 12:30. The prefects changed rotations at midnight, which created a 2-minute window of mutual absence on the second floor. Fred had delivered this information at breakfast wrapped in a note inside a chocolate frog box, which Harry thought showed good operational thinking. They met at the base of the staircase, Harry first, then Ron coming down with his wand already in his hand because Ron prepared for things physically rather than mentally, Hermione last with a bag over one shoulder that she'd spent Thursday afternoon packing with the systematic thoroughness she applied to things that mattered. Harry didn't ask what was in it. He trusted her packing the way he trusted her thinking, which was completely. The castle at midnight was different from the castle at any other hour. Not frightening, it was his, he'd decided that on the first night, but different. Deeper somehow, more itself, the way a person is most themselves when they stop performing. The torches had burned low and the shadows moved differently and the portraits slept, their painted subjects slumped in their frames in attitudes of profound painted unconsciousness. Harry's wand was in his hand and the invisibility cloak was over all 3 of them, which was a tight fit that Hermione had resolved by a charm that she'd found in a book about spatial extension and applied to the cloak's edges with a precision that made even its enchanted fabric slightly confused. It worked. They were invisible, and they were quiet, and they moved. The bond was the calmest it had been in a week. Harry had expected it to be loud, running hot with urgency or alarm. Instead it was the warmth of a banked fire, present, sure, completely itself. Not the warmth of something about to happen but the warmth of something that had already been decided. He thought of what the concordance said, the pair need only commit to the intention and the magic will find the form. He thought, we've committed. We've been committed since Wednesday. The bond knows. They reached the mirror on the second floor. Harry pressed his palm flat against the frame, it swung inward, not on hinges but on some other principle, rotating through a space that didn't quite accord with the physics of mirrors and walls, and the passage beyond was cold and narrow and smelled of centuries. Ron went first, which Harry had not expected. But Ron had taken point position at the entrance with the quiet decisiveness of someone who has thought about what their contribution is and is doing it, and Harry stepped back and let him. They moved through the passage in single file. Harry went last, watching behind them, the cloak bundled under his arm since there was no space to use it here. The stone walls pressed close enough that his shoulders brushed both sides simultaneously, and below his feet the floor sloped slightly downward, which told him they were going below the 3rd floor rather than to it, which told him the passage was older than the locked door. The passage ended at a stone door with no handle and no lock. Ron looked at it. Then he looked at Hermione. Hermione put her hand on it and said nothing, just pressed her palm flat and thought, and Harry felt through the bond the specific quality of her thinking, not a spell, not an incantation, but the same wordless intention she'd used on the matchstick, the same reasoning from composition rather than commanding from above. The stone door's molecular structure was persuaded that being open was more consistent with its nature than being closed, which was the kind of magical logic only Hermione would arrive at and which worked completely. The door swung open. The room beyond was where it started. The dog was asleep. Harry had expected this. Quirrell had to have a way to manage the first obstacle, and a sleeping three-headed dog was a solved three-headed dog, but seeing it was different from expecting it. It was massive in the way that made massive inadequate as a descriptor, filling the room the way a boulder fills a riverbed, its three heads lolling in various directions with the absolute boneless abandon of deep sleep. It smelled overwhelmingly of dog, amplified by a factor of 3. A harp sat in the corner playing itself, something slow and low and hypnotic that had clearly been running for some time. "Don't touch the harp," Hermione said, very quietly. "Wasn't planning to," Ron said, also very quietly. The trapdoor was in the floor between two enormous front paws. Harry crouched and examined it, a standard trapdoor mechanism, nothing magical about the door itself, the magic all being in the dog above it, and pulled it open. Cool air came up from below. No light. He looked down. The bond gave him a completely calm pulse. Go. He went. Dropped feet first into dark, landed in something that immediately began moving, plant, living, wrapping around his ankles with the reflexive enthusiasm of something that had been waiting for exactly this kind of engagement. He felt it climbing his calves before the others had landed and thought, relax, not to himself but to the plant, the same reasoning from composition Hermione had used, reaching for the plant's essential nature rather than fighting it. The devil's snare went still. Ron landed beside him, immediately tangled to the thighs, and swore with impressive specificity. Harry steadied him and thought relax again, more broadly this time, extending the intention outward through the room, and the plant loosened throughout, its grip going slack, tendrils retreating. Hermione landed, assessed, saw the stilled plant. "You already did it," she said. "Talk to it," Harry said. "Talk to it," she repeated, with the expression of someone filing a new piece of information. "Right." The plant released them. They moved forward. The key room was full of winged keys and 3 broomsticks and the specific dense difficulty of a charm that had been set by someone who had spent 40 years thinking about how charms work from the inside out. Flitix, clearly, the keys moved in ways that spoke of advanced charm logic, their flight patterns governed by something more complex than random, almost like the keys were playing a game with a specific internal rule structure that a broomstick rider would have to read and respond to in real time. Harry was on a broom before either of the others had finished looking at them. He didn't think about it. He mounted, pushed off, and the broom moved beneath him with the responsiveness of something glad to be used, and the air of the room rushed past him and he was reading the keys immediately, not thinking about them, just reading, the same pattern recognition he used to feel the shape of problems, and the correct key was obvious within 8 seconds of flight. It was the large antique one with a bent left wing, flying erratically because of the damage, describing a slightly desperate oval in the upper left corner of the room. He went straight for it. The other keys scattered and some of them dove at him, they were charmed to defend themselves, clever, the whole construction was genuinely clever, and he took 2 glancing blows on the arm and 1 on the shoulder and didn't slow. The bent-winged key saw him coming and fled with the panicked energy of something that knows it's been identified, and he cut left and cut right and then reached forward and closed his hand around it. It tried to bite him. He held on. The door at the far end clicked open. He brought the broom down and looked at Ron and Hermione. Ron had a long scratch on his cheek from a key that had gotten close. Hermione was perfectly unscathed, having apparently spent the entire key battle standing completely still in the center of the room with her arms at her sides, which was what she did when she judged that stillness was a better strategy than action, which infuriated keys with nothing to react to. "Efficient," Ron said to Harry. "Thank you," Harry said. "It wasn't a compliment," Ron said. "I had my broom and everything." "You can fly the way back," Harry said. "There's not going to be a way back," Ron said, and they both stopped, because that was a true thing neither of them had quite said aloud, and saying it aloud gave it a specific weight. There will be a way back, Hermione said, firmly. For two of us, at minimum. Let's go. The chess room was McGonagall's, unmistakably. It had the precision of her, the spare elegance of someone who sets a problem to be solved rather than a trap to be sprung. The pieces were large and cold and white on their side, black on the other, and they were waiting. Ron looked at the board for 30 seconds. In those 30 seconds he went very quiet and very focused, and the casual, cheerful Ron who teased Harry about brooms and ate enough at dinner for two people receded entirely, and what was left was the Ron who had mapped Hogwarts patrol schedules in his head on the Hogwarts Express and figured out Snape's chamber would be logic-based. The Ron who thought about chess the way some people think about breathing, automatically, constantly, at a depth that didn't require effort because it had been internalized years ago. I need to play, he said. On the board. As a piece. Ron, Hermione started. I know, he said, not dismissively but with the calm of someone who has already done this calculation and is past the part where it's a decision. I know. The board won't accept a purely external player. McGonagall wouldn't have left that option open. Someone has to play from the inside. He looked at the pieces, gauging. I'll take the rook. Rook gives me the most mobility and I won't be in a central position, which is where the endgame sacrifices happen. McGonagall designed this, Harry said. She knows you'd pick the rook. Ron looked at him with a faint smile. She'd expect me to take the knight, he said. Everyone takes the knight. Knight is the exciting piece, the one that moves in an L, the one that surprises. She'd designed the board expecting a knight-forward strategy. He looked back at the pieces. So I'm taking the rook and I'm going to open with something she wouldn't have designed against. Harry looked at the board. Then at Ron. You've been planning this since Wednesday. I've been planning this since the first time Fred and George mentioned the third floor, Ron said. I just didn't tell you because I didn't want you to think I was planning to sacrifice myself. Are you planning to sacrifice yourself? Hermione said. No, Ron said. I'm planning to win. He paused. Those aren't the same thing. He stepped onto the board. The knight nearest him stepped aside without instruction, which meant the board had registered him, accepted him as a player. He took his position as a rook, the piece moved for him, vacating its square, and looked at Harry and Hermione from the other side of the board's edge. You need to go through, he said. I'll get you there. When I say, you run for the door and you don't stop. Ron, Hermione said again. I know, he said, again, with the same steadiness. I'll be fine. I promise I'll be fine. And if I'm not, he stopped, briefly, then restarted. If I'm not, go anyway. Don't stop. A silence. Then Harry said, you'd better be fine. Obviously, Ron said. You're my best friend, Harry said, and he meant it the way you mean things when there isn't time to mean them carefully, just truthfully and quickly. So you'd better be fine, Ron. Ron's ears went pink in a way that had nothing to do with embarrassment. Yeah, he said. You're mine too. Now let me play chess. It took 14 moves. Harry and Hermione watched from the edge while the pieces moved with the weight and authority of something real, their stone feet grinding on the board, and Ron directed from his square with the voice of someone completely in command of the thing he was most himself at, calling moves, adjusting strategy, reading the board 3 moves ahead and then adjusting again when it responded in ways he hadn't expected. The board was good. McGonagall had built something genuinely difficult, not a fixed sequence but an adaptive response, a game that played back and calibrated. But Ron was better, and not because he was more powerful, because he understood sacrifice in a way the board's programming didn't, understood that giving something up willingly and early changed the whole geometry of the game, and the board kept responding to an opponent who valued all his pieces equally because most people did, and Ron didn't. On the 14th move, he gave up his rook, himself, in a sacrifice that opened a diagonal Harry hadn't even seen, and the black queen took him, which meant the queen had moved to a square where the white king's path to the door was completely clear. Go, Ron said. He was sitting on the board, having been knocked to the side of his square, not seriously hurt, dazed. I'm fine. I'm fine, go. Hermione was already moving. Harry looked at Ron for 1 second, checking the fine, confirming it, and then followed her through the door. Behind them, the chess board stood still. The potion room was Snape's, and it was exactly what Hermione had predicted and nothing like what either of them had been prepared for. Not a potion to brew. A logic puzzle, 7 bottles on a table, a riddle in verse on a piece of parchment between them, and a fire wall ahead and an ice wall behind, and 2 of the 7 bottles that were the relevant ones, 1 for going forward and 1 for going back. Hermione read the riddle once. Then she read it again. Then she said, with the specific tone she used when she was acknowledging something against her will, "This is genuinely good." "Which ones?" Harry said. She read it a 3rd time and walked the length of the table looking at the bottles, shapes, sizes, positions, the way Snape had put this together as a piece of logic rather than magic, the way he deliberately used something that couldn't be cheated by a powerful spell, something that required thinking. Harry watched her and felt the bond running warm and steady and left her to it completely, because this was Hermione's chamber the way the key room had been his and the chess board had been Ron's, and his job was to be present and trust her. She pointed to the smallest bottle on the far right. "Forward," she said. "And the rounded bottle 3rd from the left." "Back." "You're sure?" Harry said. She looked at him with an expression that said, "Don't ask me that." "All right," he said. "You drink the one for back." "Harry, you take the antidote and go back," he said. "Get Ron. Get help. Find a way to get a message to Dumbledore or someone who can help." He looked at her. "That's what needs to happen." Hermione looked at him for a long moment. The bond between them was very bright and very still in the way it was when they were both being completely honest. "I don't want to go back," she said. "Not an argument. A truth." "I know," he said. "You might need me in there," she said. "I might," he said. "But Ron needs you more. And if something goes wrong in there, someone needs to be able to tell the story correctly." He paused. "You're the only person I trust to do that." That landed. He'd known it would. Not because it was manipulation, it was true, every word of it was true, but because Hermione's particular sense of responsibility, the part of her that had been filing everything for 2 years and building the record of what they were together, would hear that and know it was right even if it was painful. She picked up the small bottle on the right. She looked at it. Then she looked at Harry with brown eyes that were doing something he recognized as the expression she used for things she needed to feel completely before she put them away to act on. "Come back," she said. "Yes," he said. Which was not "I'll try" and not "I promise" but was something more direct than both, the specific declarative tense of someone stating an intention as fact. She stepped toward him and pressed his knuckles once, the careful, aware touch, and the bond went full bright between them, the same brightness as Ollivander's shop, the same brightness as the key room and the wall in the dungeon, all of them together at once, the whole history of what they'd built over 2 years running at once in 1 second of contact. Then she drank the antidote. The ice wall parted. She walked through and didn't look back, which Harry knew was the harder of the 2 choices. He picked up the small bottle. He drank it. The fire wall parted. He walked through. The last chamber was round and lit by torches that burned without holders, the flames rising directly from the stone floor in a circle around the room's edge. It was cold despite them. In the center, his back to the door, standing at a mirror Harry recognized, the mirror of Ariste, moved here, its gold frame catching the torchlight, was Quirrell. He turned when Harry came in. His face was calm in a way it had never been in class. The stutter was completely gone. The nervous hand-wringing was gone. He stood straight, and his eyes were still with a stillness that belonged to something that had been very old for a very long time. "I wondered if you'd make it," he said. "I half expected you to send the mudblood." "Don't call her that," Harry said. Not angrily. Just flatly, as a correction, the way you correct something that's factually wrong. Quirrell looked at him. You're not afraid, he said. No, Harry said. You should be. Something in his voice had shifted, not Quirrell's voice anymore, not entirely. A second register under it, lower, older. There are things here that have undone much more prepared wizards than yourself. I know what you are, Harry said. What's underneath the turban? I know who's been directing you. A pause. Then Quirrell smiled, and it was not Quirrell's smile. Of course you do, the second voice said, fully now, coming through Quirrell's mouth, using Quirrell's face as a medium. The bond tells you, doesn't it? The concordance. I wondered how long it would take. You know what it is, Harry said. I have spent a great deal of time in libraries, Voldemort said, through Quirrell's mouth. More time than you might imagine, given my current limitations. I know exactly what the concordance is. I knew about it before your parents died. A pause. I killed them for reasons that had nothing to do with you, as it happens. The prophecy was about power. But the bond, he tilted Quirrell's head, considering, the bond made you something I hadn't accounted for. The stone, Harry said. You're not going to get it. I was just studying this, Voldemort said, nodding toward the mirror, and trying to determine the correct approach. Quirrell couldn't see what he needed. The mirror shows desire, and Quirrell desires only to serve me, which is, a pause that carried contempt, insufficiently specific. The eyes focused. But you. The mirror shows you what you desire most. And what you desire is not the stone. So you'll see it differently. I'm not using the mirror for you, Harry said. I'm not asking, Voldemort said. Quirrell's hands came up, and the magic came with them, not Quirrell's magic, not any single person's magic, but something that had been built from decades of practice and hatred and relentless, brilliant, terrible will. It hit the air around Harry like a physical weight. Harry felt it. He felt it the way you feel a storm, not just weather but pressure, the specific density of something enormous moving through the world. And then, beneath it, the bond responded. The bond didn't respond like a shield. It didn't come up in opposition, it came up in fullness, the way the concordance had described, the way neither of them had ever quite experienced it alone because it required both of them together. Except Hermione wasn't here. And yet. Harry felt her. Not behind him, not physically, but present in the bond the way she'd been present in the bad nights at Privet Drive, her warmth a deliberate brightness through the connection, from whatever place behind the ice wall she'd stopped and was pushing everything she had through it, knowing he needed it, knowing without being asked, the bond running at full capacity across the distance between them because that was what the bond did and always had. He was not alone. He stood in the chamber and felt the full field of the concordance for the first time, not half of it, not one instrument in a pair, but the thing itself, both of them together despite the distance, and it was, enormous didn't cover it. It was the feeling of the wall in the dungeon and Ollivander's candles and two wands harmonizing, multiplied into something that filled the entire room. Voldemort felt it. Quirrell's eyes widened. What? The second voice said, and for the first time, just briefly, it was surprised. The bond works at a distance, Harry said. He could feel his own voice carrying something it hadn't before, not loudness, but weight, the kind of weight that comes from having something behind it that is very large and very sure. You thought you had to separate us. But that was never going to work. Voldemort's magic came again, harder this time, shaped now with the intelligence of someone who has recalibrated immediately and is not making the same mistake. It wasn't a blunt force now, it was targeted, surgical, aimed not at Harry's body but at the bond itself, trying to find its frequency and disrupt it. Harry felt the attempt. He felt it reach into the connection and probe it the way a hand probes a lock, looking for the mechanism. And he felt, equally clearly, Hermione's response, her mind moving through the bond with the focused rapidity of her best thinking, identifying what was being attempted, and doing something precise and devastating to the mechanism of the attack before it could find purchase. The probe dissolved. Voldemort's magic scattered. Quirrell made a sound. "She's not even here," Voldemort said, and the surprise in his voice had become something else. Harry recognized it, had heard it in Snape's voice when Harry hadn't dropped his eyes, had heard it in Draco's voice when Hermione hadn't taken the expected position. Recalculation. The Concordance operates at this distance. It was built by Rowena Ravenclaw and Godric Gryffindor, Harry said. For this. For exactly this. He walked forward. Not charging, walking, with the deliberate pace of someone who is not in a hurry because they know where they're going. "You're a brilliant person, I think. And you've wasted it spectacularly." Quirrell flinched. Voldemort, behind the face, "I wasted nothing. I built more magic in one lifetime than any." "You destroyed your own soul into fragments because you were afraid of dying," Harry said. "That's not building. That's panicking." He stopped 4 feet from Quirrell. "The stone would give you a body. And then what? More of this." "More of everything," Voldemort said, and the voice had abandoned its control now, the second register coming fully through, old and cold and burning with a want so deep it had become its own form of destruction. "You're 11 years old. You don't understand what I've seen." "I understand you're afraid," Harry said. "I'm not." He raised his wand. What came out was not a standard spell. He didn't speak an incantation because what he was accessing wasn't the structured magic of Hogwarts curriculum, it was the Concordance itself, the deep foundation, the magic Rowena and Godric had built not as a weapon but as a truth, a statement about what magic was for, and what it was for was life and connection and the opposite of the fragmentation Voldemort had made of himself. It came out as light. Not the blue-white of a Lumos. Not the red of a Stunner. A warm gold-white that was both colors of the wands in Ollivander's shop and something older than either, and it filled the room completely for one long, breathless moment. Quirrell screamed. Not from pain, from Voldemort, who could not be in the presence of this specific kind of magic without experiencing what he had made himself into, which was absence, which was the negative space where a person had been, and that absence couldn't be in the same room as the Concordance running at full capacity without knowing what it was. The mirror behind him blazed gold. The stone, and Harry understood this without knowing how, the deep knowledge from the wall in the dungeon, the Founder's certainty settling into him, the stone was in his pocket. He reached in and it was there, warm and heavy, the way it had described in Flamel's accounts, and he closed his hand around it. Quirrell collapsed. Not dead, Harry checked, quickly, crouching beside him without touching, feeling the pulse of life still present under the wrongness. Unconscious. Whatever Voldemort had been in him had been expelled, not destroyed, expelled, which meant somewhere in the darkness between worlds something was retreating, diminished, furious, not finished. Harry stood up with the stone in his hand. The chamber was very quiet. The torches burned in their circle on the floor. The mirror of Eriste reflected Harry standing alone in the round room, and in its surface, behind his reflection, the outline of something, not a figure, just a warmth, a presence, brown eyes and a steady brightness, that was the bond showing him where Hermione was. "Close," said the bond. "Coming." He sat down on the floor in the center of the chamber and held the stone and waited. She came through the fire wall 7 minutes later. He heard her before he saw her, her footsteps, quick and certain, and then the fire parted and she came through and saw him sitting on the floor and saw Quirrell unconscious at the far wall and saw the stone in his hand. She stopped. "You got it," she said. "The bond helped," he said. "From the other side." She looked at him, and her face was doing the thing it did when she'd been frightened and was releasing the frightened now that it was over, the color coming back, the shoulders dropping. "I felt what you did," she said. "The Concordance, I felt it through the connection." "It was, yeah," Harry said. She walked forward and sat down on the floor across from him, crossing her legs in the same position he was in, and they looked at each other in the torchlight in the last chamber under Hogwarts with the Philosopher's Stone between them. "Ron," Harry said. "On his way to the hospital wing," she said. I got back to him before he'd fully recovered, told him what to do, and came back. He'll be fine. He was already arguing with me when I left, so I took that as a positive sign. Harry breathed out. Good. Dumbledore's coming, she said. He got my message, I sent a Patronus. She said this with the specific casualness of someone mentioning they've done something technically very advanced as if it were a minor detail. You cast a Patronus? Harry said. It turns out strong emotion is the primary component, she said. The emotion was not in short supply this evening. What form did it take? She looked at him with slightly pink cheeks. An otter, she said. Apparently. Harry looked at the stone in his hand. Mine would be a stag, he said, with the same certainty he'd had about the holly wand. I haven't cast it. But I know. Yes, she said. I think I knew too. They sat in the quiet chamber and the torches burned and outside the fire while the rest of Hogwarts was sleeping, and the bond between them was the warmest it had ever been in 2 years of being exactly what it was, steady, sure, completely itself, the double heartbeat in Harry's chest running in its close, harmonizing rhythm with hers. He'll come back, Harry said. Voldemort. This didn't finish him. I know, she said. But it stopped him for now. And we'll be better next time, he said. Considerably, she said, with the briskness that meant she was already planning. I have thoughts about the second year's reading list. Of course you do, he said. Don't make that face, she said. Preparation matters. I'm not making a face, he said. I'm agreeing with you. You just can't tell because you're looking at my forehead. She looked at the scar briefly. Then at him. It's less angry looking, she said. Right now. It was red earlier, when the bond was at full, whatever that was. Full capacity, he said. The concordance said, I know what the concordance said, she said. I've read it more than you. I mean, not more carefully, she added, which was conceding something, just more frequently. Hermione, Harry said. Yes. Well done, he said. Tonight. All of it. She looked at him for a moment. Then away, briefly, and then back, and her expression had gone to the unguarded version, the one she kept for things she didn't need to manage. You too, she said. From somewhere above them, a long way away through stone and magic and the deep foundation of Hogwarts, they felt the castle register something, a door opening, footsteps that carried the weight of someone very old and very powerful moving quickly through a space that was entirely prepared to receive him. Dumbledore was coming. Harry turned the stone over in his hand once, feeling its warmth, and then set it on the floor between them. It sat there in the torchlight, small and red and quietly extraordinary, and they looked at it together, and the bond ran full and warm and certain around them both. Chapter 6. After the fire Dumbledore arrived the way serious things arrive, without announcement, without the theatrical flourish the occasion might have invited, just a man coming through a fire wall with his robe slightly singed at the hem and his half-moon spectacles catching the torchlight and his eyes taking in the room with the speed of someone who has been doing rapid assessment for a very long time. He looked at Quirrell first. Then at the stone on the floor. Then at Harry and Hermione sitting cross-legged across from each other with the specific composure of people who have finished something. He stood very still for a moment. Then he said, quietly, "Good evening." "Professor," Hermione said. Harry said nothing. He was watching Dumbledore with the same calm attention he'd given him in the mirror room 3 months ago, reading the old man the way the bond helped him read things, not just the surface, not just the words, but the shape of what was underneath them. What was underneath Dumbledore right now was something complicated. Relief, yes, the stone was intact, Quirrell was down, Voldemort had been expelled from the school. But beneath the relief was the specific discomfort of a man confronting the gap between what he had planned and what had actually happened, and finding the gap considerably wider than he'd expected. He had planned for this, Harry understood. Not this exactly, not Harry and Hermione working the concordance at full capacity, not the chambers being navigated in an evening by 3 first-years. He had planned for something more contained. Something he could see the shape of. Something that moved through channels he understood. What had happened instead was the truth, which was messier than plans and considerably harder to file. Dumbledore crossed the room and crouched beside Quirrell, touching 2 fingers to his temple and then pulling them back with an expression that settled into sadness. He was not an evil man, he said, more to himself than to them. He was a man who was not strong enough for what found him. He stood. He looked at the stone. "May I?" Harry nodded. Dumbledore picked up the stone and held it for a moment, and his expression did something that Harry couldn't fully name, not grief exactly, but adjacent to it. The weight of something long considered and finally resolved. "Nicholas will understand," he said, quietly. Then he looked at Harry. "It needs to be destroyed." "I know," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. "You know. The Founder's knowledge from the wall said it's a destabilizing object," Harry said. "Something that promises to solve death doesn't solve it, it just defers it in ways that create worse problems downstream. Voldemort is proof of that." A long pause. Dumbledore turned the stone in his fingers, and then something in his expression settled into a decision, and he put it in his robes. "I'll speak to Nicholas tonight," he said. "He has had it long enough to know this, I think. He has simply not been ready to accept it." "Is he really that old?" Hermione said. "Older than seems reasonable," Dumbledore said, and something in his voice carried the particular quality of someone who has lived long enough to be genuinely tired of watching people mistake length for fullness. He looked at them both. "I owe you an apology." Harry had not expected that. Hermione's expression said the same. "Several apologies," Dumbledore continued. He moved to the wall near the door and leaned against it, a surprisingly informal gesture for a man of his bearing, but it made him shorter, less monumental, and Harry understood it as deliberate. As an adjustment. The notes. Gryffindor's notes. He removed his spectacles and examined them for a moment. "I told myself I was protecting you from the weight of understanding something too large too soon. I think I was also protecting myself from the uncertainty of what you might do with that understanding, unsupervised." "Yes," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him sharply. Not unkindly, just with the alertness of someone who expected more resistance and got directness instead. "That's an honest assessment," Hermione said, "and we think you should know we appreciate it." "The honesty," she added. "Not the management." Dumbledore put his spectacles back on. Something that wasn't quite a smile moved through his expression. "Yes. I gathered." He looked at Harry. "The concordance. You accessed the full field. Both of you." "She was behind the fire wall," Harry said. "She pushed it through from the other side." Dumbledore's expression did the complicated thing again, the relief beneath the wonder beneath the something harder. "The text says the bond operates at distance," he said. "I read that and understood it intellectually." "I did not," he paused. "I did not understand what it looked like. What it actually was." He looked between them. "I may owe the Founders an apology as well." "What for?" Hermione said. "For underestimating the thing they built," he said simply. They were quiet for a moment. Somewhere far above them, the castle settled into its nighttime sounds, the specific music of a sleeping building, whined through the towers, the creak of old wood and the changing temperature. "What happens now?" Harry said. "To us. Officially." Dumbledore considered this with genuine care. "That depends substantially on what you want," he said. "The Ministry will hear about tonight regardless. There are containment protocols for events of this magnitude, and I won't be able to prevent all of the information from reaching people it perhaps shouldn't." He paused. "Your names will be known. More known than they already are. There are people who will be interested in what you are." "Good," Harry said. Dumbledore blinked. I beg your pardon. Good, Harry said again. We're not hiding. We're not going to hide what the bond is or what it does or what we are. Hiding it weakens it, we know that, we've read the concordance, but more than that, we don't want to. We're not doing anything wrong. I am aware of that, Dumbledore said. I know you are, Harry said. I'm saying it for the people who might not be. Dumbledore looked at him for a long, considering moment. The torches in their floor circles burned. Quirrell was still unconscious at the far wall, his chest rising and falling with the shallow rhythm of someone who had been emptied of something that had been taking up a great deal of room. You've changed, Dumbledore said, which was not quite right. I haven't, Harry said. I think you're just seeing me more clearly. A pause. Then Dumbledore made the sound that wasn't quite a laugh but wanted to be, and said, yes. I think that may be exactly right. The hospital wing in the small hours of morning had a specific quality, the particular quiet of a place that takes the serious parts of things seriously, that makes no performance of care but simply provides it, steady and complete. Madame Pomfrey moved between beds with the economy of motion of someone who has been doing this for decades and has eliminated every unnecessary step. Ron was in the third bed from the door, sitting up against his pillows with the expression of someone who had been told to rest and intended to comply only in the technical sense of the word. He had a bruise across his left cheekbone from the chessboard and his right arm was in a sling that he was already clearly planning to remove the moment Pomfrey left the room, and he looked up when Harry and Hermione came in with the specific relief of someone who has been waiting and not quite admitting they were waiting. You're both alive, he said. We're both alive, Harry said. Excellent, Ron said. He looked at Hermione. Did you actually cast a Patronus? I did, she said. In the middle of all that, Ron said. It was relevant, she said. You're 11, he said. I'm aware of that, she said. It turns out being 11 doesn't prevent it. Ron looked at Harry. Harry shrugged. Ron shook his head and then winced because the head movement pulled something, and then said, Did you get it? The stone. Dumbledore has it, Harry said. He's going to destroy it. Ron leaned back against his pillow with the posture of someone releasing something large. Right, he said. Good. A pause. Was Voldemort actually there? Like actually, he was on the back of Quirrell's head, Harry said. Ron's face went through several expressions. On the back of his, he stopped. That's genuinely horrible. Yes, Harry said. And you just, dealt with that. We dealt with it, Harry said, looking at Hermione. The bond was the key element, Hermione said. The concordance, running at full field, you don't have to explain, Ron said, with the tone of someone who is slightly overwhelmed by the specifics and is accepting the result as sufficient. I believe you. It clearly worked. He looked at them both, and his warm brown eyes had something in them that was fond in the way of someone who has been in a genuine thing with other people and knows it. My mum is going to lose her mind about this. We haven't told her yet, Hermione said. She's going to find out, Ron said. She always finds out. She found out about the time Fred and George released a fanged frisbee in the Transfiguration corridor 4 days before any professor noticed. She has sources. He paused. She's going to want to feed you both. Aggressively. It's how she processes concern. I can think of worse responses, Harry said. Ron smiled. Then, more quietly, the chessboard thing. I know it wasn't, I know I said I was fine and I was, mostly, but I want you to know I wasn't being reckless. I thought about it properly. I know, Harry said. And I'd do it again, Ron said. I know that too, Harry said. I just wanted, Ron stopped. Started again. It mattered to me. Being part of it. Not just, watching you two go and dealing with it. Being actually part of it. You were the most important part, Hermione said, which she said with the specific plainness she used for things she considered simply true. Without the chess board we couldn't have gotten through. Harry could have flown the keys corridor on his own and I could have solved Snape's logic puzzle without either of you, but the chess board needed someone who could play from the inside and do it without hesitation, and there is nobody else." She stopped, looked slightly surprised at herself, then continued, "There is nobody else I would have trusted with that." Ron looked at her with the ears going pink expression. "Right," he said. "You're very good at chess," she said, with the straightforward delivery of someone for whom this is simply data. "I know," Ron said, and grinned, and it was the full, unguarded, completely Ron version. Madame Pomfrey came back and looked at all three of them with the expression of someone who has found more people in her hospital wing than she left. She looked at Harry and Hermione. She pointed at 2 beds. Her expression suggested strongly that there would be no discussion about this. Harry lay down in the nearest bed and looked at the ceiling of the hospital wing and felt the bond settle into its nighttime rhythm, still, warm, the double heartbeat slow and even, and Hermione was 2 beds over and Ron was between them, and after a while all three of them were asleep. Morning arrived with Dumbledore. He came with 2 chairs and his sherbet lemons and sat beside Harry's bed and waited for him to wake, which Harry did at 6:15 with the alertness of someone whose body had decided enough was enough and it was time to process the previous 12 hours. He sat up. Dumbledore offered a sherbet lemon. Harry took it. "The Ministry sent someone at 4 in the morning," Dumbledore said, by way of greeting. "And?" Harry said. "And I sent them back at 4:15, Dumbledore said, with the information that an event of some significance had taken place and that I would be in touch when I had a full account." He paused. "I wanted to speak with you first." "What do they want?" "A great many things," Dumbledore said, "most of which are not in your interest." He looked at Harry over his spectacles. "Minister Fudge is a cautious man. He prefers things to be small and manageable and consistent with his existing framework. Last night was none of those things." "We're not going to make ourselves small," Harry said. "No," Dumbledore said. "I don't believe you are." He turned his lemon. "There will be people who want to study the bond. To understand it. To potentially, there is a word, regulate, which is ministry language for making something serve an institutional purpose it was not designed to serve." "They can try," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. "You're not concerned." "Should I be?" Harry said. "The concordance operates on consent. They can't regulate something that works on consent. If they try to use it, it won't be there for them to use." He paused. Rowena and Godric weren't stupid. They built that in on purpose. A long pause. Dumbledore was doing the evaluating look, the one that looked at multiple layers simultaneously. "What aren't you telling me?" Harry said. Another pause, longer. "The prophecy," Dumbledore said. Harry waited. "There is a prophecy," Dumbledore said, "made some years ago, about a child with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. Voldemort heard part of it, and acted on it, which is the reason your parents," he stopped. "The reason your parents died." "And you think it's me," Harry said. "I know it's you," Dumbledore said, with a directness that cost him something. Harry could see it. "The prophecy speaks of a boy born as the 7th month dies, to parents who defied Voldemort 3 times. There are 2 who might have fit those conditions. Voldemort chose you, which, the act of choosing, in this kind of magic, fulfills the condition. He made it about you." Harry sat with this for a moment. He thought about the mirror, and the future self in it, older, present, surrounded by people. He thought about the Founder's wall in the dungeon and Rowena's voice, "If they choose to carry it, they'll be extraordinary." He thought about the bond in the last chamber, the full field, the light. "Does the prophecy mention the bond?" he said. Dumbledore blinked. "It does not." "Then it's incomplete information," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that had gone entirely past the managing warmth into something else, something that was genuinely uncertain in a way that was not weakness but the specific vulnerability of a man smart enough to know when he's at the edge of what he knows. I don't say this to be difficult, Harry said. I'm saying the prophecy was made before the bond activated. It describes me as a single person with a specific kind of power. But I'm not a single person in the way it means. The concordance changes the calculation. Voldemort didn't account for Hermione last night and that's why it worked. The prophecy didn't account for her either. You think the prophecy is wrong? Dumbledore said, carefully. I think it's right about what it knows, Harry said. I just don't think it knows everything. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. Do you believe in it completely? The prophecy? A very long pause. I believe in you, Dumbledore said, finally. Which was not the same thing, and they both knew it, and Dumbledore's expression said he knew it. Then trust us, Harry said. Not as variables in a plan. As people who are going to make decisions. Give us information, give us access, stop managing what we know, and trust us. Hermione's voice came from 2 beds over, also the restricted section. Dumbledore turned. Hermione was sitting up with her arms crossed and her expression entirely awake, which meant she had been awake for the entirety of the conversation and had chosen to let Harry have it and contribute at the appropriate moment, which Harry found completely characteristic. Full access, she said. The whole restricted section, not selected texts. We're not going to misuse it and you know that. Dumbledore looked between them. Something in his expression went through a full rotation, starting at resistance, passing through evaluation, and arriving at something that was not quite capitulation and was more like recognition. Full access, he said. With the understanding that I'd like to be told if you find anything that concerns you. We'll tell you, Harry said. We were always going to tell you. We just weren't going to let you decide what we could and couldn't handle. I'm beginning to understand that, Dumbledore said, quietly. He stood, put his sherbet lemons in his pocket, and looked at them both, the long, taking stock look of someone revising a significant portion of a held framework. The end-of-year feast is tonight, he said. I expect you'll receive points. He paused. A considerable number of points. We didn't do it for points, Ron said, from his bed, apparently also awake. I know, Mr. Weasley, Dumbledore said. That is precisely why I mentioned them. He left. The door swung closed behind him. In the silence that followed, Madame Pomfrey appeared with 3 breakfasts and the expression of someone who has made peace with the fact that her patients were apparently conducting significant institutional negotiations at 6:30 in the morning and has decided her contribution is to make sure they do so with adequate nutrition. Ron looked at his breakfast with the specific reverence he gave to food he hadn't had to wait long for. That was, he started. Don't make it a big thing, Harry said. I'm not making it a big thing, Ron said. I'm just noting that you told Dumbledore to trust you and he said yes and also you got us full restricted section access which frankly affects me as well and nobody asked. You're welcome, Hermione said. I wasn't complaining, Ron said. I was noting. He picked up his fork. I just think it's worth noting. When you do something extraordinary it should be noted. Harry said. Noted, Ron confirmed. Yes. He began eating with great conviction. Harry looked at his own breakfast and ate, and the hospital wing was warm and entirely ordinary, and outside the windows the Scottish morning was doing what Scottish mornings did, which was be grey and green and vast and not particularly concerned with what had happened the previous night. The story got out by lunch. Not the full story, not the concordance, not the detail of what had happened in the last chamber, not the specific mechanics of a 12-year-old girl pushing the full field of a founder's enchantment through a firewall from the other side. But the shape of it, 3 Gryffindor first years, the 3rd floor corridor, Quirrell, Voldemort, the stone. It moved through the school the way significant things move, faster than the official version, told in variations that each preserved the essential truth while adding or subtracting details according to the teller's relationship with them. Harry knew it had fully circulated when he walked into the great hall for lunch and the noise changed. Not silence, the hall didn't go silent, because it was full of people and people don't simply stop, but the quality of the noise shifted, the same way water shifts when a stone drops into it, and every table turned toward the door, and Harry walked in with Hermione on his left and Ron on his right and kept his pace exactly as it had been and did not look anywhere except toward the Gryffindor table. He heard his name in a dozen conversations simultaneously, the way you hear a specific instrument in an orchestra when you're listening for it. He heard Hermione's name, which had a different quality, the speculative, evaluating note of people processing that the story's second half was a person they'd been observing all year and reassessing accordingly. He heard Ron's name, lighter, warmer, because Ron was Ron and people found Ron instinctively likable and the chessboard story had already achieved the specific legendary quality of something that would be told at Hogwarts for decades. They sat down. Percy Weasley leaned over immediately and said something congratulatory that he managed to make sound both genuine and like he was reporting it for the record. The twins appeared from nowhere. They had a talent for appearing from nowhere that Harry suspected was related to the map they'd mentioned and would one day ask about properly, and George said, "Knew you had it," and Fred said, "Didn't actually think you'd go down there tonight though, to be clear," and George said, "I thought it," and Fred said, "You didn't," and the argument dissolved into cheerful noise. Neville Longbottom, who was sitting across the table, looked at Harry with round eyes and said, "Was it actually Voldemort?" "Part of him," Harry said. Neville nodded slowly. He had the expression of someone doing something difficult in real time and choosing to do it anyway. "My parents," he started. Stopped. Started again. "Voldemort, his followers hurt my parents. They're in St. Mungo's." He said it with the steadiness of someone who has held something a very long time and has gotten good at holding it, but not okay with it. "I'm glad you stopped him." "I'm sorry about your parents, Neville," Harry said, and meant it the way you mean things when you know what it is to have parents taken from you. Neville looked at him and seemed to find something there that helped, though Harry couldn't have said exactly what. He nodded again, smaller this time, and went back to his lunch. Luna Lovegood from Ravenclaw stopped by on her way out, which was unusual because Ravenclaw and Gryffindor tables were not adjacent and she had clearly made the detour on purpose. She was small and blonde with eyes like large gray windows and the particular quality of presence that comes from someone who doesn't experience social embarrassment as a significant constraint. She looked at Harry and Hermione with the evaluating, unguarded attention she applied to everything. "The Raxperts were very agitated last night," she said, conversationally. "I could feel them from the Ravenclaw tower. Something big happened to the magical atmosphere." "Yes," Hermione said, which was the right answer because engaging with Luna's framework was more productive than explaining it. "You have a very clear magical signature together," Luna said. "Both of you. It's like, you know when you look at a double star. Two stars so close they look like one bright point from a distance but when you look properly they're two separate things in close orbit." She considered. "Like that. But warmer." She wandered away. Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Harry. "Double star," Hermione said. "She's not wrong," Harry said. "She's remarkably not wrong," Hermione said, with the expression of someone adjusting a filing system to include a new and useful category. Draco Malfoy found Harry in the corridor after the afternoon's lessons. Not the same corridor as October, a different one, third floor, near the window that looked out over the lake, and Draco was alone this time, no Crabbe and Goyle flanking him, no performance of position. Just him, standing by the window with his hands in his pockets, and when Harry came around the corner he straightened without quite making it a confrontational gesture. Harry stopped. Read the scene. Kept walking to the window and stood 6 feet from Draco and looked out at the lake, which was green-gray and wind-touched and completely indifferent to anything happening indoors. "My father is very angry," Draco said. "I imagine he is," Harry said. "About last night." "About what you," he stopped. "He said you shouldn't have been able to do what you did. He said the bond," another stop, and something in his jaw tightened. "He's been following it. The bond. He knew what it was. He told Voldemort about the concordance 2 years ago," he said. Harry looked at Draco. He told Voldemort about us. About the possibility of you, Draco said, and his voice had the specific flatness of someone who has recently received information that has done significant structural damage to an existing framework and is still standing in the rubble. He said if the bond activated, you'd be, he stopped again. A threat. To the cause. He wanted Quirrell to stop it, Harry said. To stop you, Draco said. Both of you. He looked at the lake. I didn't know. I know you have no reason to believe that, but I didn't. He doesn't tell me things like that. I'm told positions, not reasons. I'm told what to think, not, he stopped. Started differently. I've been thinking about what the Granger girl said in October. About people who need bloodlines. Harry waited. He could hear the difficulty of what Draco was doing, not the drama of it, because Draco wasn't performing anything right now, which was unusual, but the genuine cost of it, the way it costs something to walk down a corridor alone and say a true thing to someone you've been positioned against. I don't know if my father is right about anything, Draco said. I've been thinking about what he is right about. Looking for the evidence, the way you'd look for evidence for anything. And I can't find it. Not in the things he says about Muggleborns. Not in the things he says about blood purity. His jaw tightened. I still might be wrong. I might be missing something. But I can't find it. You're not missing something, Harry said. Draco looked at him sharply, which was the reflex of someone who has grown up in an environment where direct contradiction was a challenge, and then the reflex faded. You're very certain about that? Yes, Harry said. Why? Draco said, and there was something genuine in it, not challenge, but actual asking. Because the evidence isn't there, Harry said. You're a smart person. You've been looking for it. If it were there you'd have found some. The fact that you haven't found it isn't a failure of looking, it's an accurate result. He looked at Draco. The question isn't whether your father's framework is right. You've already decided it isn't. The question is what you do with that. Draco was very quiet for a moment, looking at the lake. I don't know, he said, finally. I know, Harry said. That's okay. Draco turned to look at him with the gray eyes that missed things less than they let on. You're not going to tell me what to do. No, Harry said. Most people in your position would want to. I'm not trying to recruit you, Harry said. I'm not building an army. If you change your mind about what your fathers taught you, that's your change to make. It won't be for me. A long pause. I heard what you did in the chamber, Draco said. People are talking about the light. Gold light, someone said. Filling the whole room. Yes, Harry said. What was it? Harry thought about how to answer that honestly. Something the founders built, he said. It does what magic is supposed to do. What is magic supposed to do? Harry looked at the lake. At the giant squid surfacing briefly near the far shore and then submerging again with the indifference of something that has been here much longer than any of the current inhabitants and will be here considerably longer after them. Connect things, Harry said. Fundamentally. Everything else is elaboration. Draco said nothing. Then, my father would disagree. Your father would be wrong, Harry said. Draco almost smiled. Not quite. It was the ghost of a smile, the movement the face makes when it's considering something and not quite ready to commit. But it was there. He pushed off the window ledge and walked away down the corridor, and Harry watched him go and filed the conversation in the place he filed things that were still developing, not resolved but not abandoned, still moving. The lake below went gray with cloud shadow, and then the shadow passed, and the water went green again. The end-of-year feast was loud and golden and smelled of 100 different things, and Gryffindor won the house cup. Dumbledore announced it with the specific timing of someone who has been building to something and wants the audience to be fully present for the arrival, letting Slytherin think they'd won, which they had on points, and then adding the events of the last week in a clear, unembellished account that made the hall go very quiet in the specific way that things go quiet when the full truth is being told instead of the managed version. 320 points to Gryffindor. Individual citations for Harry, Hermione, and Ron. Dumbledore read the citations with the gravity they deserved, not performing them, not making them into something for the crowd, just stating what had happened and what it had required, and his voice as he read Hermione's citation had a quality that Harry noted and stored. Miss Hermione Granger, for magical ingenuity of the highest order, for operational reasoning under extraordinary conditions, and for an act of connection, through the Founder's concordance, that has not been documented in living magical memory. A pause. The last item is cited not as a technical achievement but as an act of will. The hall was entirely silent for 3 seconds. Then it was very loud. Hermione, beside Harry, looked at her plate for a moment. Her expression was the one she used for things she needed to feel completely before she put them away, and he let her have it. Ron was already being clapped on the back by multiple people simultaneously, which he was handling with the natural grace of someone who likes people and doesn't mind being liked back. Harry looked at the staff table. Snape's expression had the quality of someone who has eaten something unexpectedly complicated and is deciding how they feel about it. McGonagall's expression was, for approximately 3 seconds, entirely unguarded before it reassembled itself into professional composed satisfaction. Flitwick was openly delighted and not trying to hide it. The seat where Quirrell had sat was empty. They found a window seat in Gryffindor Tower after the feast, which was the specific window seat in the far corner that caught the last of the evening light and looked west over the grounds. Harry had established it as a thinking spot sometime in November, and Hermione had adopted it sometime in December, and by January it had become theirs in the unspoken way that spaces become people's. Ron had gone with Fred and George, who had produced a small and technically illegal celebration in a disused classroom involving something that bubbled and tasted of butterbeer and everyone was pretending was entirely harmless. He'd looked back when he left and said, an hour, which meant he'd be back. The evening light came through the glass and moved slowly across the stones. Below, on the grounds, students moved in the warm June air, taking the last of the day while it lasted. The lake was far and silver. The forbidden forest was dark at its edge and then darker beyond. Harry said, "What did you feel, when you were pushing the bond through the firewall?" Hermione considered this the way she considered everything, thoroughly, without rushing to an answer. "Like lifting something very heavy," she said, except the weight was mostly emotion. Fear was the heaviest part. She paused. And then when it connected, when I felt it land in the chamber, it was like putting the heavy thing down. It became easy. Another pause. The harder part was not being there. Doing it from the other side. "I felt you," he said. "As clearly as if you were in the room." "I know," she said. "I felt that. That you felt me." She looked at the evening grounds. "The book said the bond grows under use. I think we've been," she stopped. "Using it constantly for 2 years," Harry said. "Since the library." "Yes," she said. "Which is why it's this strong. Which is why it could do what it did last night." She looked at him. "Harry. The concordance said it grows under use, which means, it's not finished growing," Harry said. "It's barely started," she said, and her voice carried the specific quality it had when she arrived at a conclusion that was both wonderful and enormous and required a moment to fully absorb. They sat with that for a while. The light moved on the stones. "Next year," Harry said. "Next year," she agreed. "Dumbledore said Voldemort won't stay gone. Whatever he is now, whatever fragment, he'll find a way back," Harry said. "He'll try again." He looked at the forbidden forest. "And there's more. The Horcruxes, the concordance showed me the shape of what he's done to himself. The fragmentation. There's more than one piece." Hermione went very still. "How many?" "I don't know yet," he said. "I felt the shape but not the number. We need the restricted section. Which we now have access to, she said, and reached into her bag and produced a notebook, new, not the one she'd been using all year, a fresh one, its cover a deep blue, and opened it to the first page and wrote at the top, with the sharp, clear handwriting she applied to things she intended to build from, Horcruxes, research starting point. Harry looked at it. You were going to do that tonight regardless. Obviously, she said. You're not even slightly tired. I'm extremely tired, she said. I'll start the research tomorrow. I just wanted to write it down before I slept because if I don't write things down they move around, he said. Move around, she confirmed. I lose the shape of them. He looked at the notebook. At the word written at the top of the first page. At the date in the corner in her handwriting, June 1992, the end of their first year at Hogwarts. We need to train, he said. Not just read. We need to find someone who can train the bond specifically. The concordance said the bonded pair could access the deep magic, she said. But it also said that accessing it deliberately, not just in a crisis, but deliberately, takes practice that goes beyond standard spell work. She turned the page. Wrote, training, concordance-specific methods. Cross-reference Gryffindor notes. Dumbledore might know someone. Or the notes might give us a direction, Harry said. Or both, she said. Or both, he agreed. Ron came back at the 1-hour mark exactly, carrying 3 butterbeers from the illegal celebration and looking pleasantly warm around the edges. He sat down in the third seat of the window alcove, the seat that had always been the third seat, the one that had been waiting for someone, and handed them each a bottle and looked at the notebook on Hermione's knee. Starting already, he said. Tomorrow, Harry said. Good, Ron said. Tonight we've earned a break. He looked out the window at the grounds in the evening light. My mum wrote, he said. She wants you both to come to the Burrow for part of the summer. He looked at Harry. The letter was quite, he stopped. She said she's known since she saw you in Diagon Alley that you'd end up in the family eventually and she was just waiting for it to become official. Harry looked at the grounds. At the castle reflected in the lake below, enormous and lit and entirely real. At the sky going amber and rose above the forbidden forest. Tell her yes, he said. Obviously tell her yes, Hermione said, from behind her notebook. Ron grinned. They clinked bottles. The evening moved slowly toward dark, and the grounds below them emptied, and the castle settled into the specific warm silence of a place that has held something difficult and is resting in its aftermath, the way you rest after something real. Somewhere in the deep foundation, in the stone below the dungeons, below the lake bed, below the old magic that Rowena and Godric had built everything on top of, something settled into its new equilibrium. The concordance, having done the thing it was made to do for the first time in centuries, ran warm and satisfied and patient with the patience of something that knows it has time. They chose, it might have said, if magic spoke in sentences. They chose, and they will choose again, and the choosing is the whole of it. Harry felt it, in the bond, in the double heartbeat that was no longer something he noticed because it had become as natural as his own, and thought, yes. Hermione, who felt it too, wrote another line in her notebook, the bond grows under use. Every year. She underlined it twice. Ron finished his butterbeer and put his feet up on the windowsill and looked at the darkening sky with the expression of someone who is exactly where they're supposed to be. Below them, the lake went dark. Above them, the first stars appeared. In September they would be back, all of it waiting, the restricted section and the Horcrux question and whatever Voldemort was building in the dark with what was left of him, Draco and his unfinished reckoning, Snape and his complicated grief, a wizarding world that was going to have to learn to make room for what Harry and Hermione were. All of it waiting, and none of it frightening. Harry looked out the window at the enormous Scottish night and felt the bond running at its full, steady warmth, and thought, we're ready. The castle breathed around them. The stars multiplied. The bond between them, foundational, ancient, chosen, growing, settled into its long and patient burn, the kind that doesn't need to be loud because it was never going anywhere. It had been here since before they were born. It would be here after the last chamber and the last trial and the last choice. It was here now, in a tower window in June, with 3 12-year-olds and the future rushing toward them like something that couldn't wait. Good, Harry thought. Neither could they.